Okay, we are live. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Welcome back to the Saturday Free School. It's good to be back. So today we'll continue our discussions from the last week about the rise of political violence and especially talk about the week of assassinations and ask the question, are we closer to civil war? And Doc will begin the discussion and then Emily will come in.
Okay, thank you, everybody, and good morning. I kind of titled this, I don't know whether the title is all that good, Civil War in the Face of a Struggle for a New People's Democracy in Light of the Assassination of Charlie Kirk. And did Tyler Robinson do it? Certainly this moment and every moment of crisis like this demands an ascending to a new quality of understanding of theory and ultimately of struggle. I'd like to go back to some things that we'd already discussed just to amplify upon them, and that is the five conditions of the current crisis, And I believe those five things as a measure of the objective situation are in fact accurate. I don't think we can begin to understand anything without understanding these five things. I just like to amplify upon them. First, deindustrialization. I know we've talked about it, and I know that there is a study group, a research group devoted completely to deindustrialization, and solutions to it, I would say. Well, deindustrialization is a word that has been normalized in a certain way that the very essence and social consequences of it are seldom seen in the word. The word carries very little weight these days because we have normalized deindustrialization and its consequences. First of all, it achieved its objective of destroying the trade union movement, leaving the working class and the lower middle classes poorer than they had been in 80 years. This has led to a vast inequality in the society as a whole. That is, the working class and lower middle classes are further separated economically and socially from the top 20 and certainly the top 10 or top 1%. The majority of Americans who are either in the working class or the lower middle class meaning have certain credentials, although not very elevated credentials, and live at an income level very close to the working class. However, the working poor is larger now than ever before. Homelessness is greater now than ever before. A vast inequality has settled over the country, and again, it is accepted as normal. Deindustrialization has meant the consolidation of the financial oligarchy, that is Wall Street and Silicon Valley and State Street in Chicago, the main centers of banking and finance in the country. Now, when we talk about finance, and to call it banking is a misnomer. This is more than banking. These are not banks. These are hedge funds. These are banks, niche banks. For instance, the bank in Silicon Valley that existed solely for the purposes the banking or financial purposes of Silicon Valley corporations. These global behemoths of finance and money, in the wake of deindustrialization, are hegemonic over the economy and the state. The so-called information economy and the so-called post-industrial economy, which we were told were to make cheap consumer goods more available to ordinary people. We were told that the hegemony of the big banks, or banks period, would open up more areas of finance and borrowing, which meant in the end that the working class and lower middle class, while losing their jobs in a post-industrial or information economy, would get different kinds of jobs, and what they would lose in wages would be made up for cheap products coming from Asia and Latin America in the first instance. This turn to this new economy, I wish to emphasize, a new economy, the likes of which had never been seen in human history. There had never been claims made like this, that I will take your union, I will take your job, I will take your wages, but in the end, you will still do better. This turn overdid over 200 years of America's economic development. Again, not only was this about larger profits and the creation of billionaires, multi-billionaires, and now trillionaires, as the state became the cover and assisting these banks and these corporations. In other words, Microsoft or Google or any of these would not exist without all of the support they get from the state, including tax abatements and low interest loans, just everything to build this new economy. So this was not just corporate America doing what, quote, corporate America does, or capitalism doing what capitalism does. This was based upon decisions of the state at the highest level. And I think since we are talking about democracy, we have to return to the question of the state and theory of the state and the practice of the state. But not only was it based upon destroying unions, but an all-out war against those nations in Asia, Africa, South America, and the Caribbean who had only recently achieved independence, and hence this new economy and this new worldview of destroying unions was tied to a new system, global system of neocolonialism, which should, in every rational understanding of things, should have united the union movement with the struggle against neocolonialism and these wars such as Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, the coup d'etats in places like Burkina Faso, and the enormous global pressure put upon new nations, especially in Africa, by the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. There is an objective link between the fight for trade unions and trade union rights and the fight against neocolonialism. However, as we have said before, The decisive weakness in the trade union movement and its leadership is white supremacy. And, it's not just hatred of the other. It is the idea that the other must remain the other and that all questions are about me. There is no, as King said, me and thee. There is no unity with people who do not look like you or whatever. So they could not see their objective ally in the fight against neocolonialism in the continent of Africa. They wish to establish a single system guided by global banks and global financial institutions and their hegemony. We often talk about the hegemony of the state, the unipolar world, all of these things. What is seldom mentioned in these discussions is the hegemon of these behemoths, these huge financial institutions, and their link to the state. In other words, deindustrialization and all that went along with it was connected to a unipolar world. It could not exist otherwise. By unipolar, we mean a one world government, or as Biden and the so-called liberals call it, the law-based system. I hold myself back because at some point I feel like just going into cold-blooded cursing. But anyway. This was a counter-revolutionary economy. It meant that for the people of this country and for the people of the world. What do we mean by counter-revolution? It was an attack upon everything that had been fought for and gained, from the New Deal and the unions to the anti-colonial struggles to the civil rights movement. It had to attack all of that. By the way, I'm always reminded of Michelle Liu's article, Queerness as a New Form of Whiteness. Indeed, you had to have new white identities, because let's keep it real. The system, be it the global or domestic system, had to anchor itself to human identities, to the human as it were. And I sometimes feel deeply hurt by the way you all were educated at elite universities, which was no education at all, which was a system of propaganda, a system of establishing for you all an identity, which was fake, and which would leave your lives without a purpose, except to look inward at yourself. War, neocolonialism, resource capture, especially in Africa, anti-working people, anti-democratic, and new forms of racism. In other words, if you're looking for the liberals to reform the system in such a way that you do away with racism in its multiple forms, you were looking in the wrong direction, because the liberals, the Democratic Party itself, were tied to a new white identity and a new form of racism, all the time claiming to carry the banner forward of Martin Luther King Jr. Again, I have to say I'm constraining myself because I really want to go into some deep cursing on this, but I'll hold off. So that's deindustrialization in its many aspects. And that's why our study of Philadelphia will be so important. and the deindustrialization of Philadelphia and its impact upon the Black proletariat. Second is the cost of empire. I just want to, tease this out a little bit more. Empire is an attack upon working people in the name of a global democracy. The whole idea that in order for the world to become stabilized, in order for there to be a rules-based system, you needed an American empire, an American war machine. Really, if you're looking for an empire like the Roman Empire or the British Empire, you ain't gonna find that in the United States. It's not set up like that. The ruling elites are situated in a different political economy than Rome or even the British Empire. It's not a mercantile empire. It is a military empire to protect and advance the interests of these huge banking conglomerates, which are then networked to, for example, tech giants such as Google, such as Microsoft, and the devices that are necessary to fuel these huge information systems, which in the end become systems of propaganda. And at the most intimate level, the transformation of the human being away from what, in a sense, are the most basic aspirations: to love one another, let us say, to love children, to hope for the best for humanity. Well, now all of that is being challenged at the most intimate level through your device. This is a vast system of empire. Nothing close to it has ever been seen, where it's not just the political economic structures of empire, let us say the British Empire controlling India or controlling Nigeria for its resources and its labor. Now we have the, quote, uniting of humanity around values and so on, cultural lifestyles that are so anti-human because they're so antisocial that the individual is more than not looking upon him or herself as an individual and only as an individual. And therefore, for instance, you take a person with all these tats and piercings and the tongue and the nose and the eyes. Well, that person is a walking kind of billboard saying, I am an individual, I'm a rebel, I'm not a part of any social system or society. My life, the only purpose of my life is me. And I want all y'all to know that. This is new. This is existential. This is an attack upon the individual in ways that the individual, especially when you start out at childhood with this, cannot identify. What happened? Why do I believe, am I an outsider? Or then the next question is, well, perhaps I should accept my outsider status. I will be that outlaw. You can see how this ultimately can tie into a Tyler Robinson or many others. But that's the spiritual, ideological, and human cause. But then there's a material cause that connects to deindustrialization. The price of American empire is unbelievable. Unbelievable, over 800 military bases. The cost of that, the cost of the wars in Western Asia, estimated at $7 trillion. In other words, if you go from 2000 to 2020, you see a dramatic, almost unbelievable rise in the debt of the government, what is called sovereign debt. In other words, when we look at this $38 trillion or more right now, a big part of it is associated with the wars in Western Asia, that is Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, and not to mention support for Israel, the military support for Israel, and so on. It is this period of the start of the 21st century that we get this spike in empire and the cost of empire as the nation moved to consolidate after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a new world order, a new empire, where you would either be with the United States or you would be an enemy of US empire. At the same time, a new system of neocolonialism. And this is very interesting, where most nations in the world were seen as actual or potential neo-colonies of American finance capital. Isn't that interesting? When nations like Britain and France and Germany and Italy and Spain act like neo-colonies of the United States. And I've said, you know, that part of the reckoning in India is, will India ascend out of this partial neo-colonial status? You know, there's many ideological questions that have to be solved, the question of whiteness, the question of the masses, especially the peasantry, and so on. The particular hatred of Putin and Russia at this point is that they would not, at the end of the day, although there were tendencies to become a neo-colony of the United States, but with the Ukraine war and Russia literally saying, beyond this point, you will go no further. And you know, the United States was always defining good relations with Russia as long as Russia remained a subordinate of the United States. China was the great stumbling block. And from my point of view, more than any other nation or civilization at this moment, humanity owes the government of China a great debt of gratitude, especially Xi Jinping, who forever, it seems, broke the mold of Uncle Tomism and bootlicking, you know, as they say, with Chinese characteristics. He said, I'm gonna be Chinese with Chinese characteristics, period. And so the 13 years that he has been the head of the Communist Party, I want to talk about that too, because that's usually used as an argument against Chinese democracy. In other words, this claim that the only way you can be democratic is to follow the line of white people. You got to be white, at least your elite has to think white. And we cannot underestimate this. And this will play out as we talk about the imminent or impending American Civil War. The cost of empire, like Martin Luther King says, the bombs dropped in Vietnam explode in Detroit. The money spent for these wars and for these 800 military bases have left Philadelphia and North Philadelphia looking as it does. It is deindustrialization, but not just deindustrialization. It's left us with a society where the ruling elite, all connected to finance and big banks. If you want to understand hip hop, which I think is one of the most pernicious forms of, and I put, oh, sorry, Andrew, I know you. Sorry. Okay. I want to talk, one of the most pernicious and negative, damaging forms of, quote, music that has ever been identified with Black people. It's worse than minstrelsy. It's worse than clowning and bootlicking that was forced upon us at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. If you want to understand it, by the way, if you want to understand Meek Mill and his Zionism, you have to understand finance capital. The romanticization of violence and even murder by young men in particular who see violence and murder as an act of rebellion against a system that is unfair to them. But even this comes out of a manipulation of their consciousness. Why would you see another Black young man like you, who maybe was your friend a couple weeks ago, as now worthy of nothing less than murder and death? How do you get to that? How did we get to that? And the only final explanation has to be the hegemonic role over culture and ideology and morals and ethics of a finance capitalist elite who must control the world, and to control the world, they must diminish the human being and turn the human being from a social being to a, quote, rebel who is speaking his truth or her truth without any concern for the status of the community as a whole. I don't think we've ever seen it, especially given the musical legacy of the 1960s and 70s. You don't have to be a genius to have found your way, even as a kid, to Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, to Curtis Mayfield, to Nina Simone. I mean, somehow you're gonna have to, if you into music, let us say, you're gonna have to run into that. Even if you as the artist didn't, maybe the producer did, who maybe has a little more consciousness than you, the musician. But you reject that or appropriate it in the most cynical way. Oh, didn't you hear? I sampled Marvin Gaye. So what? You may have sampled a couple of lines, the rhythm of it, which is all brilliant, but you reject the essence of it, which is rooted in Black freedom. And that's the cynicism of it all. Or you take, and I'm a boxing fan along with my road dog, Alice. The man who proclaimed himself the greatest of all time. He's greater than Muhammad Ali. I mean, I don't know how he defines greatness. But let's keep it 100. Floyd Mayweather gave over $100,000 to the Israeli army during their genocide against the Palestinian people. You're great. That makes you great. And this cynicism that pervades cultural and entertainment elites, quote unquote, who are all manufactured by the same people, they all exhibit a form of cynicism as they laugh all the way to the bank. We have never experienced this, nor have we experienced in this mix this high level of mental illness among children, suicide among children and youth, or at least suicidal ideation. 12-year-old, what is my life worth? What do I have to live for? I'm nothing. And profound alienation. This is all the cost of empire. Third is the crisis of governance, and thus the crisis of legitimacy, which I've always said it's like that, but it's more than that. It is a crisis of the state. And this is where we are. Crisis of the state means a crisis of rule. Ultimately, a crisis of law. It is a crisis of the state, suggests the imminence of a social collapse. And again, I've always said what Marx called the ruin of all classes, the undoing of civilization and social order. Now, we'll always hear this, well, we have to return to civil discourse. We have to respect the opposite opinion. And if Charlie Kirk was anything, he believed in discourse. Well, I'm about on the verge of cursing again. To perpetrate that fraud, that lie, he wanted to destroy discourse. And we'll come back to that. We've gone through classical political theorists like John Locke, Rousseau. We've also talked about Alexis de Tocqueville. I was telling my brother here that the week that he brought it up, I had been thinking about Alexis de Tocqueville and his, it's considered, I guess, monumental Democracy in America, comparing it to Du Bois's Black Reconstruction. And then, of course, Lenin. All theorists of democracy, all social theorists are concerned with the state, not with governance as such, but governance as it is connected to the state, to a constitution, to a regime, to a form of rule. For this reason, Hitler referred to his regime as the Third Reich, which meant he saw it in a historic secession from the First Reich, which I think was the Holy Roman Empire in Germany in the 16th through 18th century. Bismarck, the founder of the modern German state, called his regime the Second Reich, the Second Empire, the second system of state rule and order, and Hitler called his a Third Reich. The point was, they were attempts, as was Locke and Rousseau, to establish a state system in order to establish social order. To say, well, Hitler was a madman that carried out the most dangerous, brutal war in human history, yes. But then I seem to remember 1884-85, when in Berlin, the European powers met to divide up Africa, the greatest partitioning of peoples and civilizations ever in history. Ever in history. So, and then of course, King Leopold of Belgium, responsible for at least 15 million deaths of Congolese people as they extracted rubber and other materials. But the crisis of governance is the crisis of legitimacy, ultimately the legitimacy of the state. And this is where we are. This is where we are. And no amount of liberal virtue signaling and oh, where did we get it wrong type of bullshit will be a substitute for an understanding of the depth and existential nature of the crisis of the state. As Serafina said, and I thought it was a very brilliant formulation on her part, that what we're looking at as a civilization of the white supremacist social system, I thought it was just so interesting. Although she doesn't want to take credit for it. Oh, everybody in free school was saying it. I said, but you said it so well. A civilizational crisis of the state and of the white supremacist social system. I just want to say something very quickly because, you know, we will run up against Marxist analysis or economic analysis, which will say, no, to understand American society, you have to understand its mode of production. And I've often said that that is a way of leading with economic analysis and seeing man as homo economus, something like economic man, which is another way of talking about rational man. Go to any university and don't major in economics. I mean, you know, but just take an introduction to economics. And the assumption is that man as man is an economic being and hence a rational being. And that what drives human beings is material benefit and material incentives. Well, if you didn't get how wrong it was in a world context, all you got to do is look at American history and know that ain't real, you know. And that is why the centrality of Du Bois is so important, and thus the primacy of sociology over political economy. At best, political economy is a region of sociological thinking. And so for us to understand the American system is to understand it holistically and in its totality. And what is it in its totality if not a white supremacist social system which emerges after the defeat of Reconstruction, after a great counter-revolution? And hence Du Bois will argue that the discovery, and this is the important thing, the discovery of personal whiteness as a personal identity is pretty much a 19th and 20th century thing, which means that the social system rooted in this idea of personal whiteness and identity, the social collectivity that emerges from that identity is vastly different from what would emerge from an identity of the human being as an economic animal. Does that make sense? If you look at this shift after slavery and after the defeat of Reconstruction, this is very important. And really, that's how we made sense of Baldwin. We gave it that chronology. That's how we made sense of Duke Ellington, Sun Ra. Once you saw more than an economic man, and you saw a total human being driven by existential and personal motives that were not singularly connected to, well, if I make this choice, I can get ahead here. That is economic rationality. And Du Bois is very correct, as is Baldwin. that often these motivations can be unconscious and certainly are, quote, irrational in the economic sense. Then there is the civilizational and moral crisis. These are huge areas of crisis. That's why, I was talking to Jeremiah and Nuri just earlier. I'm listening to Ezra Klein and Ross do that. I'm saying, have they gone back to the intellectual kindergarten? Just liberal cry, that liberal white trying to appear simple. Oh, I'm a good guy, and we good white people, we want to do the good. Come on, man, we beyond that point, Jack. We in a whole new world. But anyway, I won't go into much. I mean, that's very clear. The foundation of law, the foundation of art, the foundation of society and civilization. In one way, I was thinking about this the other day, Martin Luther King's famous sermon, 3 Dimensions of a Complete Life. In a lot of ways, I read that as his thinking about civilization, because that third dimension, you could call it God, you could call it civilization. The third dimension, that dimension that cannot be anchored to a material benefit, is not just about what and who you see, but is about something that you don't see, that you don't touch. You know what I'm saying? This is something new. And I read that I recommend it highly, 3 Dimensions of a Complete Life, as a study of civilization and morality. And that is why King anticipated in his action, but especially in his words, the speech, 3 Dimensions of a Complete Life, the essay, Letter from a Birmingham Jail, the book, Where Do We Go From Here, the essay, My Journey, My Pilgrimage to Nonviolence, where he said I had to go somewhere else other than white or Western civilization to discover the real foundations of the Christianity that I proclaim. And then finally, the crisis of knowledge and of science. Big. When the scientist becomes a propagandist of a system of white supremacy and exploitation. And that's pretty much what they are. Who live so good and so well and so soft, they never have to do anything but just show up from time to time. And therefore, the only purpose of their life is not the purpose of science and knowledge as it was conceived, let us say, by Einstein or Hegel or Du Bois or Baldwin. Knowledge is propaganda, and they are propagandists. Science and scientific research is the same. The elite university is connected to the state and the warfare state. And therefore it is morally culpable. Don't run around here telling me that you're a tenured professor. I'm not going to say Temple, at Harvard, and you got your tenure, and therefore that shows how bright you are, how smart you are. I'm not interested. You're nothing but a tool of an empire that has one purpose: to enslave most of humanity, including the majority of people in your own country. Now, of course, I'm going to mention this guy, Peter Thiel. you know, so-called genius, so-called white man, so-called everything thing. Peter Thiel is considered one of the futuristic thinkers of the white ruling elite. Now I'm going to go from wanting to curse to falling on the floor, holding my sides, laughing. These cats ain't what they promoted to be. I can tell you. Peter Thiel has one theory, one thing that he wants to say, and that is that that America became stagnant after 1969. We put a man on the moon, and here I'm reminded of Gil Scott-Heron, Whitey's on the moon. We should return to that one. But we put Whitey on the moon, and a month later, we had Woodstock. And after that, all bets were off. The nation became technologically stagnant, and on and on and on. Well, hometown, in the mix of ideas and activity, King didn't exist for you, Malcolm X, none of that, Black. In other words, whatever the nation was, became, and is a white affair. Y'all are just here because we brought you here to make you slaves so you can do better. We saved you. You think I'm making, they believe that. Trump and them believe that. I'm gonna get back to that, you know. Charlie Kirk, come on, man. In other words, by the transatlantic slave trade, where upwards of 50 million Africans died in the transit. Millions more died on the plantation, or lives cut short. You were helping me? And you did this as an act of generosity? Well, we'll come back to that. We're dealing with a distorted world. But anyway, these are the objective foundations of the current political crisis. The ruling elite on neither side has a proposal to move out of this crisis. Neither the so-called liberals who command the state at this point, nor those who are challenging their control of the state in the MAGA Trump movement. Neither side has an answer to the crisis. And they will not have an answer. They cannot find an answer because they believe, unlike Baldwin, and let us repeat again and again, Baldwin's argument that for America, and he didn't use this one, to be great, it had to become the last white nation. That is the last thing that the Dudats, the Ezra Kleins, or the Steve Bannons, or the Charlie Kirk want. They all want to reestablish a whiteness in one or another form. I'm gonna go quickly. What is a civil war? None of us have ever seen a civil war in this country. We have read about one. And that was 1861 to 1865, 64, 65. Over the question of slavery, although neither side was anti-slave. The only real anti-slavery force in the country as a force, now I'm not talking about individuals, as a force were the slaves themselves and the free Negroes. That is what won the war. Lincoln was not anti-slavery. He was against the expansion of slavery. The Confederacy opposed Lincoln. not on the basis of slavery itself in the states such as Alabama, Mississippi, all of that, South Carolina, but on the basis that he would be opposed, Lincoln would be opposed to the expansion of slavery to Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, and wherever. Mexico, if they could get down there. So it starts as a struggle over the nature of the state at that time. Let us recall the American state coming out of the American Revolution was a compromise between those who were wedded to the slave economy, the plantation economy, and those who were not. Those who were not anti-slavery. They were just not wedded to the economy of plantation slavery directly. Many were indirectly through banks, through merchants, through shipping, and so on and so forth. Let us not forget again, cotton was king because cotton was fueling the industrialization of England. And by the way, here's the tripartite. The Black South, the American South, the British manufacturing, like in Birmingham and other manufacturing cities, and the vast market for India, which makes all the sense going forward 150 years or 100 years when you see Howard Thurman and his wife Sue Bailey go to India. It was just taking the same route in a reverse way, rather than for enslavement to find a path to mutual freedom. And I have to, just in parentheses, when I listen to these no good bum-ass liberals trying to talk about American history, and they don't even know who Howard Thurman was and his significance. But anyway. But we're looking at something like a cold civil war these days. When a nation, and here we're talking about the white part of the nation, and this is what makes America so difficult for the European theorists of European class and so on, that they cannot understand that in one nation there are more than one nation. There are two nations, two life worlds, two social systems. Everything is in two. And the color line defines the boundaries. That's what produces the barrenness and emptiness of contemporary Marxism. They cannot figure this out because it does not fit the structure, the logic of their thought. So therefore, racism is a form of false class consciousness. Okay, yes, but I think racism is derivative from class relations. I could say a lot about that. I mean, just the very idea that you don't understand dialectical logic enough to understand how things are mutual, how a dialectic is a unity of conflicting categories, at least that. And I ain't going, I don't begin or end there, I'm just saying, but they cannot understand how this country to be understood, how this society to be understood, how white civilization to be understood. You must see the twos and the color line, which makes it necessary to at least see all of these categories in two. If there is a white supremacist social system, and I'll argue that with anybody, any economist, if there's a white supremacist social system, then you must also see the black social system. And if you can't see it, it's most time because you don't want to see it. It's everywhere. You could just be a visitor to Philadelphia and see black people. They live here. They got their church. They got what they do. And then white people live. So, and you say, well, what's going on here? Or, like a lot of immigrants or people that just visit, they say, well, I don't want to look at that. I just want to look at the Liberty Bell. You know what I'm saying? You put blinders on because it is so confounding. The movies I saw when I was in China and Taiwan, they showed the beautiful suburbs and white people playing games and going to Disney World and swimming and happy, happy, happy. But what about these black people? I mean, how did they always stay in this state of poverty? You see what I'm saying? That is what must be explained, and how these black people survive, how they produce literature and music and art, and the intellectuals that surpass anything produced in this. That's why white people, they pro-American, America this, America the other. And then you say, well, okay, let's deal with that. Let's take the music of America. Yes, there's white music. Yes, there's hillbilly music. Yes, y'all do y'all's thing. But you ain't produced no Ellington. I mean, you can talk about Bob Dylan all you want, but that ain't no Sweet Honey in the Rock. That ain't no Mahalia Jackson. You ain't did it. I mean, when you measure it, nothing. So you have to act like it never existed. For you to exist as a white person, it is existential to deny blackness and the achievement of black people, and that at the foundation of what is a possible new nation is it's all black. Black folk have carried this nation, including whites and white immigrants, on our shoulders. They have done nothing of the level of black people. And we have to make this clear. But how could we do it? It is a social system. And as we say, the black gods of the metropolis. Fawcett is a genius. I mean, to come up with that. But okay, let me out of some good note. A civil war is when normal processes of society, of politics, of ideological struggle, of cultural battles are diminished, and all issues are finally settled through force of arms. The existence of the state, I'll repeat this, assumes the existence of society and of a social order. The state exists to defend social order. The existence of a law-based state is to say that all human beings are equal before the law. Never been the case in the United States, by the way. At this point, after kicking the can down the road for at least 2.5 centuries, we're now at a moment of reckoning. Where the crisis of living, of everyday living, of will my children have a future, I'm talking about the white narrative, is now up in the air and uncertain. The state cannot guarantee certainty to white folk. That was the promise. Unite with us in all of our wars, because we're fighting wars in the name of democracy to be read as whiteness. You promise to protect my whiteness, I will fight wars for you. You promise to protect my whiteness, I will be an enemy of the People's Republic of China. You protect my whiteness, I ain't gonna raise my voice when you assassinate Patrice Lumumba. That is the trade-off, and they know they made it. And now that trade-off is in crisis. The politics of that trade-off is in crisis for the reasons that I've said, this deindustrialization, the cost of empire, on and on and on. They cannot make a promise that they can keep to white people. They cannot make a promise that they can keep to white people. There is no racial contract that can be upheld. This is how deep the crisis is. And it's very personal for white people. Because they're looking at their white elite and saying, you lied to me. For black people, we ain't feeling that. Lied, that's all you did was lie. So I mean, what you for white people, it's a revelation. Oh, you lied to me. You know, but that I want to come back to that. Civil wars are usually not fought by everybody, but by minorities. Definitely led by committed minorities. The civil war that could take place in the United States, which is taking place at a very low level at this point, they call it a cold civil war, is a struggle for state power. And I think we have to keep this at the forefront. This is not the Civil War of the 1860s to overthrow one economic system and to prevent a secession. This is, I think, a more profound struggle for state power. Let me show you how the dimensions of this work. Oh, let me just say very quickly, and I think this is a given. The way white people are talking about Kirk, Charlie Kirk, black people ain't talking like that. I mean, we basically don't feel it. I mean,
I really didn't know who he is.
I mean, yeah, I mean, like, wow. You know, another one bites the dust, I guess. But you look at the U.S. Senate, which passed a resolution to make October 14th Charlie Kirk Day. Now, here is the demented mentality, the lack of, wait, Cynthia. The lack of a moral foundation, a political calculus, not a moral calculus. They want to make this cat the new the Martin Luther King for the white man. Y'all, you got a holiday for Martin Luther King. We now want a holiday for Charlie Kirk. He is our civil rights leader. This is what we're looking at. Now, but the situation is filled with contradictions. If they could just say, oh, we're going to bring all white people back together by making Charlie Kirk this advocate of civil rights and a darling of all white people. And so, if it were that easy, it would be nothing to talk about, but it's not that easy. Let me show you. I divided it into two groups of thinkers, you know, and they as representatives. Stephen Bannon on the populist libertarian right. As I've said before, big mouth, you know, wants to, you know, by the way, they all claim a working class origin. Oh, my mother worked in the diner and my father worked in the factory down the street and I went to West Point. And it shows you how I fought to be where I am and I'm a good white man and I worked on, you know, all that. The white narrative, they all worked hard, by the way. There's no white person you ever met that didn't work hard. But Steve Bannon, he's a threatening, try to threaten people, try to sell a lot of wolf tickets, you understand? And such. On the other side, I put the liberals, so-called liberals, and they're not all Democrats. Ross Do That or Duffett, who is a libertarian Republican. These are people who are public intellectuals. In other words, the liberals write in the New York Times and the Washington Post, the Atlantic. These are magazines we don't read and don't subscribe to because we can't afford them. Yeah. So they're for certain intellectuals. Foreign Affairs magazine. Don't even worry about these. I mean, if you want to do the New York Times, just do the headlines. Because, well, anyway. But David Brooks, and there are others, but these are among the most articulate of the so-called liberals. Steve Bannon, podcasters like Curtis Yarvin, what's the other one? Rufo. These are libertarians that we've spoken about before. There are others. There is the head of the Office of Management and Budget. Vaught. Yeah. And maybe you could throw Peter Thiel in there. Now, I'm naming these names not because you have to know them or look them up or listen to them on podcasts. They done wore this podcast thing out, by the way. It done got wore. Everybody's a podcaster now, plus it's a good way to make some money. I was thinking about it when my money got funny. You don't know, man. You get at a desperate, you might have to do a podcast. And just like my girl, what's her name? Or the black girl that's down with Candace Logan. Candace Logan. Hey, Candace is a real hustler, man. She's good. Okay, but I ain't gonna talk about that. But how you gonna be down with Charlie? Oh, my good friend. The man done just told you that you and everybody that looked like you was inferior to him, but I love Charlie. Okay, we'll come back to that. But the two sides, and I've paid some attention in this last week, 2 weeks, since the killing of Charlie Kirk, to how they are performing. The Trump MAGA group, they have said in no uncertain terms, you all, meaning the liberals, meaning the state, are responsible for the death of Charlie. I can't keep up with Kirk. I think I have tendencies towards a white man like he got towards us. He can never remember a black man's name. So I forget these white names. I really do. And y'all have to forgive me if I come off a certain hearted. But look, come on, man, y'all ain't that important. So I forget the names. But anyway, Charlie Kirk, Trump said it, the MAGA movement has said it almost unanimously. You all, by calling us fascists and yada, 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 you are responsible for creating an environment for him to be killed and for the 2 attempts on Trump's life. And now, don't say you down with us and Charlie Kirk, and we should all now come together. Said, no, we ain't gonna come together. There has to be a reckoning. That is what they are saying. That is what they are saying. In other words, as Trump calls them, the radical left, the Marxist scumbag. Again, don't get President Trump confused with an intellectual. He cannot think in nuanced ways. It's just, but anyway, he's the president. But he has a point. You cannot, if you look at that 2024 election, even the 2020, they criminalized the man. They said he was a fascist, a threat to democracy, and literally were calling for him to be killed. Nothing less than death was what he should get. They're saying, and this Charlie Kirk is not a small figure. Charlie Kirk was second only to Trump. The only way they could have gone higher than Charlie Kirk was to kill Trump. Charlie Kirk was the future of this movement, this populism, this white populism. More than Trump is the future. More than J.D. Vance is the future. And so the emotional response to his death is based upon, you have robbed us of our future, of the MAGA movement. You see what I'm saying? And Bannon and them are saying, no, we ain't coming together now. We've only begun to fight. How far they will go with it, we don't know. What they are capable of, we don't know. From a sociological standpoint, I have questioned white capacity to do very much beyond destructiveness. Can white people build a movement? Can they sustain a movement? Can Charlie Kirk inspire a white civil rights movement that goes beyond him? I don't think so. But they are capable of a self-destroying conflict of a civil war type. The threats that MAGA and Bannon and Trump and J.D. Vance and others are making towards the liberals, I don't take lightly. I think these are threats that many of them intend to carry through on. The liberals, such as those who write in the New York Times, and the people that I've mentioned are mainly writers in the New York Times. They are ideologues, they're public intellectuals who represent this financial oligarchic elite. The New York Times ain't in New York for no reason. It's close to Wall Street. It's close to banks. It's close, don't nobody read it, but how y'all stay in operation? How you still got advertisers? Because the ruling elite realizes they need the New York Times and they need the intellectuals who write on the opinion page. What they are saying, let's not take it to civil war. Let's back up. We're prepared to concede to you. Charlie Kirk was a great man. This is white people, of course. And therefore we will concede in the name of unity to prevent an all-out civil war. The very nature of their discourse, the very nature of the way they talk, suggest that they are very frightened.
Yeah, right.
That they're in a state of anxiousness, a state of fear of what could come about. Now, of course, the Bannons of the world are going up against the state. And just because, Ezra Klein and the people in New York Times, David Brooks and them, talk about let's have peace, the forces within the state, the deep state, the intelligence agencies, the CIA, the military forces. We're not talking about huge numbers. We're not talking about the whole army or all calling out the Marines and the national. No, it won't take all of that necessarily. It could be targeted strikes against the leaders of what could be, of the MAGA populist civil war forces. One of the things that Bannon and those think, they say that, well, the 2024 election showed that all that they did to Trump, criminalize him, all of these indictments, and all that they did, he still won the presidential election. And they see this as a mandate to move decisively against the liberal state. Now, one of the claims that they make, they want to make America great again, and we know what that means, to reestablish white values, the white family structure, the patriarchy, back, and I always say this, back to Plessy v. Ferguson. I say to everyone, if you can't read the whole decision, or if you can't have time to read Homer A. Plessy, that is Homer Antoine Plessy, one of the most beautiful names in the history of civil Supreme Court arguments. Homer Plessy's argument that if you put the protection of whiteness ahead of the protection of the rights, the due process and voting rights of black people, you are denying me the right to legal equality. To go back to Plessy, which was overturned in 1954, but to go back to Plessy is in effect saying that the state and the Constitution and the Supreme Court are obligated to protect whiteness, not white people, but whiteness as a social legal category. No nation in human history, at least as far as I know, has ever established whiteness as a legal category. In other words, I'm not protecting that white person or this white person. I'm protecting the category of whiteness. This is, the nation was great before black people had civil rights. If you're looking for the liberals or for the Democratic Party to put up a great struggle to defend black people, you'd be waiting for the rest of your life. They're not going to defend black people because their interest is the defense of the state. And if black people have to be kicked to the curb, so be it. Okay? The higher struggle is for the state. A lot of people don't understand what is going on, what time of day it is. Okay, I'll end on this. Charlie Kirk. They want to make him into something he never was. Now, there's an article in Vanity Fair, which I haven't read, but I heard it spoken about, by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And, I read parts, but I know what he's doing. I know he didn't do all the research. It was, put his name on it. But what he says, and he had a debate with Ezra Klein, too. And he said, you talking about this cat that Charlie Kirk was doing politics in the right way, the right way, which that his speech and his going on college campuses to talk about, how black people, the problem that black people have is that their family structure. See, once I hear a white man go to that family structure shit, after over 250 years of legalized rape, you're going to talk about a family structure? Once a white man make that discursive move, you need to go for your knife or at least your pistol. He ain't your friend. That's where he went. That's where he lived, in that narrative, that Black people are responsible for their own oppression. We did y'all a favor in enslaving y'all. The civil rights movement was led by that dangerous communist named Martin Luther King Jr. That Martin Luther King wanted to overturn America, not save America. And all of this narrative, and he was given hundreds of millions of dollars. I ain't talking, I mean, he even outdid Ibram Kendi, who the ruling class gave $55 million to. And he ain't did nothing. I mean, ain't wrote nothing, ain't did no research or nothing. Just represent. They did the same with Charlie Kirk. Just represent. And much of his money came from Zionists. Now, Max Blumenthal, he came out with an article saying or suggesting that the Israelis had something to do with the murder of Charlie Kirk. And that, so, you know, I ain't trying to weigh it right or wrong. But see, the thing is that within, and this is Nuri and Jeremiah last week, the whole thing of the shift in the young generation against Israel and against Zionism. And that's on both sides of the political thing. By the way, I mean, this young people as Democrats or young people as Republicans, that's a bunch of nonsense. Most young people, I mean, up to 50 damn near, don't identify with either party or don't identify politically, and the biggest choice for them is whether or not to even get involved in the political struggle.
That's right.
And they have decided that Zionism and even Judaism, as practiced by Ashkenazi Jews, in other words, white Jews, is Zionist and genocidal. So Charlie Kirk is saying, you done gave me all these hundreds of millions of dollars to go out here and talk to these white youth. And when I can't even start talking, the first thing they want to ask me, what do the Jews or do the Israelis control Trump? You know, I mean, it's just a wipeout. So he's saying, I'm not against Israel. I'm not against your genocide. Keep doing what you're doing. You know, you're talking about a morally corrupt cat. Just keep doing what you're doing in Gaza. I ain't got no problem with it. And I'm talking, you know, but now you're going to have to tell me what I tell these young people who are against it. I think that maybe there could have been a conspiracy. Now, you know, the MAGA movement is filled with conspiracy theories. And they're going back and forth. Candace, on one week, she say, Charlie was my friend, and Altman, or these powerful Zionists, they didn't like that he was turning against Israel, so they knocked him off. You know what I'm saying? Then she switched back. I didn't say that. All I said is maybe they did, something like that. She retracted her. But you have others like the Bannons and so on, like the Marjorie Taylor Greens and them, who are saying they believe that the hand of Israel is in it. Now, there is some evidence that Trump himself is afraid of Netanyahu and Mossad. He's afraid on two fronts. One, Jeffrey Epstein, if they let them files go, he's all in that thing, and you know, he's all up in that. And that would damage his presidency beyond repair. And the other, he feels that if he goes against Israel in Gaza or in Iran, if he stands up against that, it could mean his life. And the man should be afraid. There are a lot of people that would like to see him eliminated. But I think that this was a lone gunman. I would stand by that to this point, unless there's some other evidence that there's not enough security in the world to protect most elected officials. Most people will decline if they are asked to run for public office. Why should I run for public office? I'm putting my family's life on the line. It's a very dangerous occupation. So I'll stop there.
I'll make one point about Kirk's name. So in the movie Apocalypse Now.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute, Derek. Emily's supposed to speak. But go ahead, Derek.
So in the movie Apocalypse Now.
Oh yeah.
And the book The Heart of Darkness. And by this name, I'm just in it with this name Kirk. So the whole journey up the river, this long, this Heart of Darkness book. This is the book. But in the movie, they're going up the river.
Yes.
But the person, Kirk, they sent him in to do something, right? In his mission, right? And now he done went and got with a different kind of trial and got totally unorthodox, turned upside down. Now they got to send somebody to go to check him out of here. But they don't care how he go up the river and go get him. He got to go through the with the brothers his whole life.
In the Heart of Darkness, the character's named Kirk.
It's Kirk. I look at having the pronunciation. It's just the idea of this dark Heart of Darkness book and what that whole thing put the human being in once he go up that river. Like you told us, don't look for us up the river. We might be on both sides, but he's going up that river. He don't know his mission, but it could be post-hypnotic all I care. The only thing about it, he's just got this. He already got this evil twin. The other one, I don't know who to talk to, but the evil twin is coming through our neighborhoods. But you go and talk to everybody on the campuses. We the only ones that ain't worried about you because I already know that movie ain't no joke. You have to read that book, Heart of Darkness, to show you what a human being is going on in that particular path, whether it's in the book or in the movie line, Apocalypse Now. It's still a scourge. Scourge your own people. Because you really is not being a human being or the champion, So that's I'm gonna land my point. That's something.
I think that's interesting.
You have to look at Part of Darkness in the book, but I'm using his name as a symbol as much as I don't want to make this kind of person. They want to carry his tomb and be a shrine somewhere. You enshrining him. That's my knowledge right now. But for a kind of person like that, he won't make it out. He won't make it out the sky. If he believes that, like the book we read about the guys, he won't make it out the sky with that disguise. No matter if they pick him up and put 59 flags on him, we know that ain't your flag. Or that ain't our flag. You know what I mean, like that. This is the embodiment. This is the embodiment of, like, somebody might say, I'm using the word right now, and I'm saying that the word can be embodied with different kind of callousness, hurt, and calling people out of their humanity.
Yeah.
And that's the Heart of Darkness. That title itself should be significant, whatever we read right now, just because it's a literary, like a Shakespeare type thing.
Yeah.
Go inside and look at it, and then come back and address Kirk. This kind of person to go on the Kings.
That's interesting. The Heart of Darkness is the heart of whiteness.
They wrote it. They wrote that.
Well, go ahead, Emily. You can.
Well, to build on what Derek and me said, Doc. Actually, what Derek just brought up again, that he had raised up black gods in the Metropolis, and that what you ended with, Doc, of that both the MAGA side And I think the shooting of Charlie Kirk and the response to it in particular, not just from the MAGA side, but even the liberal elites, like you said, conceding in the name of unity. Like, not trying to clarify the moral record of what Charlie Kirk represented, but instead to concede, to be like, he was a great man, he did politics right, that sort of thing. Conceding in the name of unity, and how you're like, neither MAGA or the liberal elites have any proposal or an answer out of what this crisis represents, the response to it. And then like the way you ended, Doc, with people don't know what time of the day it is. It reminded me of like, even when we brought up with Black Gods, that like we've been reading Arthur Fawcett's Black Gods in the Metropolis, and something that we're still making sense of, but noticing with, or like throughout all the different types of Black Gods, is they all attempt to answer the question of what time of the clock is it? And they all motion towards understanding or idea of Judgment Day or the Great Armageddon. And in some ways, it's their answer to a question of a civilizational crisis, the great crisis, the great Judgment Day before humanity, to resolve what is like an existential problem of the white supremacist social system. And in some ways, it helped me understand even the urgency of King, where King's last book, Where Do We Go From Here? In some ways, I think he's raising the same question of there are two paths now, chaos or community. Like Judgment Day is upon us. And something I thought a lot about was actually, I went back to Du Bois's essay, Jefferson Davis as a Man of Civilization. And because in some ways I was trying to make sense of why suddenly all types of people, including sections of the liberal elite, are basically trying to raise Charlie Kirk out of even like beyond the facts of his own life as essentially a representation of civilization. And it's kind of interesting because it even goes back to what you were saying, Doc, about personal whiteness, or the identity of whiteness was something that was birthed specifically after the defeat of Reconstruction, a compromise between the North and the South over what we have in common is a raising of the white supremacist social system. And I just wanted to read, I didn't want to add too much, I just wanted to read some sections of it because it helped me. To me, I think something that is becoming clearer is, I think the category of seeing all this as a crisis of civilization itself versus are we really going to go beyond what is a dying Western or white civilization towards a human civilization, something new, is what I think the response to Charlie Kirk's shooting and death, and then even the response, like I think people are raising Charlie Kirk's death and saying that it should be held as a blow against civilization, a blow against, like you said, a blow against our future, a blow against white civilization, when actually people should pay more attention to the fact that Tyler Robinson, or like we said last week, Tyler Robinson making that step, which is, I think, it's a statement of something moral or political, that he wanted to kill Charlie Kirk like that should be taken more seriously as an act by an individual expressing a crisis of civilization itself.
He might be like John Brown. When it comes down.
I don't know about that,
but the young man, right? And I ain't thumbing the ride with him, but he could be in our folklore, because this man that was rattling all the stuff he was saying, he was trying to rattle us. We wasn't being rattled. He got rattled.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, like he got, but
He got rattled.
the difference is Tyler Robinson, who shot Charlie Kirk, I don't think he was as morally clear as John Brown, who was actively against abolition.
He's gonna be in some kind of folklore, believe me, because they hate that they can't make that man, they can't canonize Kirk to make him an icon, like a religious icon, give him a holiday, a half flag, and we like, what he got a flag for? Why he get a flag? Like he captured, like what, did he capture the United States, or did he capture the Capitol or something? If you're gonna give that flag, like if they give him the flag, we might as well say our flag got captured by some wicked people that our Civil War troops fought, like the book, like Killer Angels, They're like killer angels. We like killer angels. Well,
Yeah,
killer
but-
angels, we like that.
Can I just say one thing? See, Charlie Kirk is an invention of powerful Zionists, powerful corporate forces.
Yeah.
John Brown was a creation of the struggle against slavery. And I would say Charlie Kirk was without any moral grounding. And that's why when she raises the question, is he a representative of civilization, and hence of what kind of civilization?
Right.
That's what she,
Because what Du Bois writes about Jefferson Davis, who is the leader of the Confederacy, is he says, I wish to consider not the man, but the type of civilization which his life represented.
Yeah.
Its foundation is the idea of the strong man, individualism coupled with the rule of might. And it is this idea that has made the logic of even modern history, the cool logic of the club. He says, it made a naturally brave and generous man, Jefferson Davis, now advancing civilization by murdering Indians, now hero of a national disgrace called by courtesy, the Mexican War, and finally, as the crowning absurdity, the peculiar champion of a people fighting to be free, in order that another people should not be free. Whenever, and this is the part that's interesting, whenever this idea has for a moment escaped from the individual realm, it has found an even more secure foothold in the policy and philosophy of the state itself. And then Du Bois says basically says that to make the danger of a representative of civilization, or to the importance of seeing Jefferson Davis as a representation of civilization, is the way it's used to put down the possibility of a new civilization, which comes from the Black social system, like Doc said, like it comes from the Black proletariat. And he says, in the history of this people, like Black people, we seek in vain the elements of Teutonic deification of self.
no, he's talking about white civilization.
Well, let's hear. He says, we seek in vain the elements of Teutonic deification of self and Roman brute force, but we do find an idea of submission apart from cowardice, laziness, or stupidity, such as the world never saw before. And he basically makes the point that actually the real civilization that is complementary but must be accepted as new is that of Black civilization in America. And he even says, what the African American contributes is showing that there's a greater ideal. The I is not important without the thou. And he says, he calls it ich dien, which means I serve. It's like the German concept of I serve. And he says, we have more than a sentimental interest, more than a sentimental duty. You, as in white folk, owe a debt to humanity for this Ethiopia of the outstretched arm, who has made her beauty, patience, and her grandeur law. And so I thought that it was helpful actually in understanding what's happening, basically seeing the way people are trying to take up or responding to Charlie Kirk as really what is truly this deep civilizational crisis. Where at this point, like even what you said, Doc, about that young people, it's not even a question anymore of young people being Democratic or Republican. Actually, to do sociology of young people, to say that most young people are even asking the question of, do I even bother caring at all? Do I bother caring at all? Or wanting to be involved in politics at all? But I wanted to add what Du Bois was making sense of, like why the civilizational crisis and how these figures are not just individuals, but represent something civilizationally. I wanted to add that in. Because I think that's what King was ultimately grappling with. Why, for example, he makes such a big deal of a revolution of values. So yeah, maybe we'll stop there.
Yeah, I think actually taking seriously the possibility of civil war, I think, is important. And the nature of a conflict like that today would both carry the unresolved like the unfinished business of even the American Civil War, but it would also be a different, like to me, I think it would be a different type of conflict.
Is that suicide, revolutionary suicide? If you say
Maybe,
gonna be in the war?
yeah, but I think it's like if we view if you view it as like two sides of white America squaring off, basically, and it's like maybe you could say also that they have two different visions or ideas of whiteness that they're fighting for or fighting to protect. Like in some ways, it's like something that contains the unfinished business of the American Civil War, Reconstruction, even of the Civil Rights Movement, but it's also a different type of conflict in a way. And I think even the part about that makes it complex is that even within the MAGA side, I wouldn't say that people are completely united. And that actually, whereas I think even the people like Candace Owens and Tucker, who would want to be like, oh, let's unify in order to defeat the so-called whatever radical left, they can't even help themselves in starting shit against like other parts of the MAGA movement, and especially on the question of Israel, and not even questioning whether Israel did it, but like questioning like why is Israel trying to cover its ass and basically like uphold Charlie Kirk as like a like someone who had only said the same thing about Israel all the time and was a great friend to Israel, which like Netanyahu very strangely released a video like basically saying like Charlie Kirk was the greatest friend to Israel, maybe because he was sensing that there was a crisis even within MAGA about this question. So I think, and that it's like the deeper roots of it is what you guys brought up in terms of young people across the political spectrum being so sick and tired of the war machine and recognizing in however limited ways, like what we actually mean by the Caustic Empire. And so I think that makes it like a very interesting and fluid and dynamic moment to me. And I think the other thing is if one still sees something in the first American Civil War that is worth taking in terms of even ideologically, it would be not just the twos in America, but the threes of America, which is in Black Reconstruction, Du Bois identifies it as like the black worker, the white worker, and the plantation or the capitalist, or the white ruling class. And you could say that maybe still today it is threes. And I think that makes it, actually, to me, one of the open questions which is raised by all this is like, okay, let's say from where things stand today, it seems almost like there's this collision course that the nation is on, which is essentially driven by this like white on white civil war dynamic. Does that mean specifically for free school that I'm not saying that we have to take a sole ideological stand, but it's like, is our position that we just kind of wait and see what happens? But then more broadly for Black people, is that the response of Black people? Just be like, kind of wait and see what happens? Or would the consequences of, let's say, a white on white civil war be so violent and destructive that it would actually require a revolutionary imperative to even prevent something like that from happening by extraordinary means and by a people's movement? I think that for me is one of the biggest core ideological questions in this time. Is like, oh, do you just kind of wait and see and let people fight it out, like let white people fight it out? Or would the consequences be so severe and unintended consequences be so severe in terms of the destructive impact across society that you can't just sit it out? And actually, it reminded me of the conversation with City Minister Ishmael Muhammad, where you kind of asked a similar series of questions of okay, what do you mean by a war of Armageddon? So what Emily was saying, and what will be the fate of Black people in this? And can such a war be averted? Is there a chance that it could be averted? And if so, what role should Black people play in that? to me, it seems that those are increasingly concrete questions. So does that make sense? Like that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yes.
If they drafted, if they're gonna draft you, it was a civil war. Would you allow yourself to be drafted even if they said we looking for you to come down here? Now this could be for anybody that would be on either those positions. And you didn't really know why I'm getting drafted, but they was, and this aim is not where we at right now. But would you answer the draft to depending on how you look at things right now?
I mean, I probably
You're looking at things right now the way you're squarely looking at everybody, like the African Americans sides in America. We've been fighting civil wars forever. Every day we get up, it's a civil war. We got civil violations when other people don't have to worry about it at all. We get followed by cars, handcuffed. We get the whole civil disobedience because we just walking down the street. But the Civil War, I was drafted. I just went there. I ain't going there. But would you accept it? That's what young people are. Would they accept it?
Well, I mean, I think that's why this conversation or Doc's introduction was so helpful in defining what is a civil war, and then also the difference between 1865 and now being a cold civil war. I found that to be very helpful because I don't think the question is, and correct me, but I don't think the question is if we're enlisted or not, but
it's people that get sent back, go back home to train in China. They go back home to train in Korea. We're basically a civilian. We really are people of civil honor because we ain't really let somebody check us. We had to go to Afghanistan or wherever we call it like that.
Well, I think
they
that's
volunteer
why,
to go there.
well, I think that's why King is so important,
Yes,
which is what is the way out? Is the way out as nonviolence and community. And I think that's also what Jeremiah was saying, which is that in the battle of these two sides, is there a third option? Is there an alternative to these two sides? And actually, I think
I'm looking at our community. I'm around a lot of African American people or people period, and that kind of wave that we might momentarily get, that might not be the wave that a lot of African American people they cook it out. They do what they work. We do what we do anyway because we always is called to a challenge every day. Bill collector, whatever it is, someone is not facing, we are facing it. If we go to the airport,
suggest something, Derek? And I just want to, just to amplify on this question of what might a civil war look like. First of all, I think we have to acknowledge that what we're calling or looking at as a civil war is a struggle to capture the state. And I don't think they've made any bones about it since Charlie Kirk's death, that it is a struggle for state power. Now, will it occur as a series of bold attacks upon the state? Will it look something like January 6th, 2017? 21, yeah. Will it look like that? See, the thing, and so you ask, well, what do Black people do in this situation? I think, now this is just possible, that Black folk have to think about every means of defending themselves against elements on both sides that could get reckless. And I'd say to Purba, she said, well, how will this affect Philadelphia? I said, well, I don't think it'll affect Philadelphia very much because the battles will be fought in areas more or less of white exclusivity. It is, I agree with the way it looks now. This is a battle between white people. And, well, that's the way the first Civil War began. So
but my question is, even if it starts as that, like, I mean, my general feeling about America right now is that I could not have predicted the feeling of what it feels like to be in America right now with you know, and like that may be my naivete, whatever, but like I think that events, especially in America, have a way of accelerating and creating second, third order effects that one can't totally predict. So actually my question is it, would it, like, can we say with confidence that, let's say if it even starts as like a white on white thing, that it wouldn't affect Black people? I'm not convinced of that possibility, if that makes sense.
Yes, I agree with you.
Just to also add to that, like I'm going back to the part where you were talking about the cost of empire, and one of the things that you highlighted also was how much the violence, the despair and the devastation of Black communities ultimately have to do with the question of what consensus, new consensus, does white civilization form? Because I think that kind of separation has become impossible anymore. That,
Could you just do that one more time?
like for instance, starting from where Emily was placing the Tyler Robinson and the Charlie Kirks of the world as a battle to reach some sort of consensus about what white civilization is even going to represent. And Charlie Kirk represents something, but Tyler Robinson represents something. And without agreeing or disagreeing or debating the pros and cons of both of these sides, we can see it as a crisis of white civilization and the need for a new consensus to be arrived. But I'm thinking about the counter-revolution you were talking about in the 70s with the assassination of King, then deindustrialization and all of this, as also some kind of consensus around white civilization having been reached, and then the devastation that it caused in, so all I'm just adding to what Jeremiah is saying is that there's always that connectedness between what is the new consensus and what is its relationship to Black people. And so just to add,
I want, like I usually do, I always try to foment a kind of collective ideology among us, and as it is perceived by the free school, because that's what we belong to. Now, what I've done since I've been connected with free school, and particularly this week, when I found that they wanted to make a holiday for the homeboy, then I said, well, where exactly are we? And it's a follow-up to, we talked about this dialectical process last week. We may get to a point, we haven't come to a conclusion where we are, but at least one thing I've identified is 4 major ideological communities and possibly 6. And when I say this, meaning people that are opposite MAGA. First, you have the Tyler Robinson covered 2. There was the anti-MAGA, and also it connects with the queer thing, because they never call him gay on television. They say, he was rankly involved with his roommate who's in the process of trans. But you notice they never talk of, you probably figure, well, what is he, the husband or the wife? You can't figure that. Number 2, see, the African-American community is complicated, and since I've been back in Philadelphia, okay, you got that proletariat, and some people talk about the grandparent work ethic. Then you got the so-called college educated, which cover 2 sides, the truly educated and the kind of lost souls that were victims of this kind of academia. So they can read and write, but they can't think too well. Then you got the proletariat, the working class, but then you have the kind of high school dropout, high school students, very conscious. He's the one that gets stopped on the street all the time. His smartness says, I know he doesn't like me because what I look like and how I dress. So he's just, then we have the community. Now, immigrant communities, what I've learned from free school, because being ESL teacher, I was always dealing with recent arrivals. What I learned from free school, the 2nd, 3rd generation Asians and Latinos that wake up and realize, well, that was a lot of what they told me in college. But it's almost like discontent with this you told me if I just become anglicized, I'll live happily ever after. But then I found out that as soon as I go to a job interview, you want to know, do I speak English? You know, Ohio, did you have ESL? Assumption. You have Asian communities, Latino, second, third generation. They didn't go through ESL. They didn't exit ESL and all of a sudden graduate high school. Okay, so we have the Tyler Robinson type, the white Americans, enlightened, or at least not non-MAGA. Number two, the African American community, which could be divided. You can get subcategories. Then you got the Asian immigrant community. And I'm thinking about India, Vietnam, Korea, larger immigrant population. Then you have the Latino, the Asian, and then and then you can even break down women because of the abortion issue. So we're talking about possible counter movements that could form that have their own reasons for getting rid of this MAGA nonsense. And then the queer, which overlaps. And the only reason I say that because this issue of transgender, that could trigger off a community. And I think the question is, where would the free school, is the free school into looking at all these different ideologies, or should we just kind of get our own together? Being in Philadelphia or what have you, confine it to one of these six. Now I can definitely see how the free school would be including the women component because we have so many. Yeah. Now I didn't want to get so complicated, but see, what I've noticed in free school, depending on the days, we'll have more, a certain group will be here, and many times the dialogue can get into one group getting more high profile than the other. But what happens, since I've been attending more, I noticed the free schools a desire to get this meta ideology that includes anybody that has a problem with math. Because really, that's what we're talking about. Wow. You know, and I didn't want to go on like that, but this is an assessment, you know, traveling, driving through Philadelphia, living in South Jersey, working in North Jersey, dealing with New York people, hearing people, everybody's upset.
Well, I would say actually part of the difficult process of continuing to not just refine our own thinking, but to also test it against the changing reality of American society is that, let's say a year and a half ago, I wouldn't have called us anti-MAGA. I would, like, our way of talking was a coalition of the discontented, which could have included people who were drawn to the MAGA thing, but weren't like super ideologically, you know, committed. And I'm not sure if we would use the same language today, but like, I think that's been part of our, at least for me, that's been part of the almost like scientific and ideological process of like, okay, like first, what do we think, but then also how do you have to change how you think as the situation changes? And I think, especially reflecting on last week's discussion, I think part of what has been interesting just reflecting is that I feel like I said, I came into free school at a time when like the woke thing was like the unavoidable zeitgeist that you had to deal with. And like that was also kind of the heyday of like that particular form of the Democratic Party. But I think in some ways I kind of underestimated the extent to which that particular historical moment couldn't hold, it couldn't last. And something new had to come to basically displace it, whether it was good or bad. And in some ways, what you can, actually the person who I'm the most interested in a negative way, is not really Trump or even Steve Bannon or anything, but it's people like Stephen Miller, who's like the kind of right-hand guy, who's the one who keeps like trying to architect like what exactly the crackdown on the left will be, and like he's the one who's calling out like they're trying to map it onto like George Soros and like the Soros Network and the Gates Foundation and stuff, which are actually things that we've talked about over the years. But I think I guess my reflection is that like even the moment that like I was the most familiar of doing politics, that moment has changed into something new, which the contours of which I'm not sure if I fully have a good grasp on yet.
Well, that's why I think civilization is important, the category, because I think that is, when I say like in religious terms, judgment day, the point of like, the fact that even what Doc quoted of Trump says that there has to be a reckoning, there is no more coming together. I feel like we've reached that point of, it's time to decide, will this be the last white nation? Or will there have to be a war to hold on to any semblance of a white civilization? And I think an additional open question is, I mean, how many people in America, like Fatu is doing the categories, the Asians, Latinos, the immigrants, and then you have white people, rich white people, the disinherited white people. Like, there's an open question mark of what actually is, what do the people think? And because like I just came from, like, part of why I had to get another cup of coffee is because like I'm so tired from going to my union's convention, like every other year convention. And it was so interesting because I was seeing all these, like, basically sometimes I am trying to assess, I'm like, well, how much are white people, especially not even white workers, the poor, white poor, what do they actually think of, like, what do they think? Interestingly, they didn't seem to care about Charlie Kirk at all. There was not much outrage over Charlie Kirk, actually, which is interesting. They were more upset when my union took a position of like, oh, the enemy is Trump and the billionaires who back Trump. Like that was the narrative that my union was trying to push. They were more upset about that. And actually this one like woman from the middle of like it's considered central PA between Pittsburgh and Harrisburg. It's like Blair County, Cambria County, like that area. She was like, it was so interesting when she came up to me and she was like, oh, I just attended the racial justice workshop. Cause like you have a choice of workshops. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting that you chose the racial justice workshop. Cause she comes from an area with 0 Black people. And she was like, oh, I didn't really end up liking it. I was like, oh, why didn't you like it? And she was like, oh, it was more political than I thought. And it's because the racial justice workshop was planned to basically be around how like, if you care about racial justice, then we need to defeat Trump. Like that, like she felt like it was really simplistic. But I was like, well, why did you choose the racial justice workshop in the first place? She was like, well, because I was curious. And no, to me, I'm like, because the assumption was that the racial justice workshop would only have non-white people. I mean, the union is basically just black and white at this point. It's just black and white. It doesn't matter how many Asian or Latinos are in healthcare. Like they're not part of the union and they're not going to come to the union. But like, it was shocking how many like just random white people who aren't even from the major cities or from like the former steel areas where there are like different mixes of racial groups because of the history of industrialization in the country. But like people from the middle of effing nowhere, Pennsylvania, are going to the racial justice workshop. And she was like, yeah, I was curious. And it's just, to me, that is still the legacy of the reckoning of the Black freedom struggle from the 50s and 60s, the confrontation of there is such thing as race. Now, what does King actually represent? King doesn't represent a Black leader, just a Black leader for Black folk. He represents a Black leader for a whole people where white civilization does not fit us anymore. Now, when will we accept that? And that's why I think King's framing of chaos or community, this is, all life is interrelated. This is not about white or Black civilization. This is a question of chaos or community. Can you see it like that? And yeah, there's sections of like where do we go from here where, I mean, yeah, that's what I think King and Du Bois, even when he was talking about Jefferson Davis as a representation of civilization, the German concept of a strong man, where the individual is more important than the collective, but then it's not even in the individual realm anymore. It's the individual who becomes the basis of the state itself. Whereas King is arguing for a different understanding of rule itself, where the collective is protected by the individual. The whole idea of selflessness, sacrifice, that I sacrifice for the collective well-being, rather than the assumption that the individual right must be protected. Like that's a difference in political and civilizational foundation, I think. And like the way King says it, he's like, oh, we should be optimistic because, I guess I'll find the quote. Yeah, he says, from time immemorial men have lived by the principle that self-preservation is the first law of life. But this is a false assumption. I would say that other preservation is the first law of life. It is the first law of life precisely because we cannot preserve self without being concerned about preserving other selves. The universe is so structured that things go awry if men are not diligent in their cultivation of the other regarding dimension. I cannot reach fulfillment without thou, which is funny because Du Bois also says the framework of I and thou. The King also says, I cannot reach fulfillment without thou. The self cannot be self without other selves. Self-concern without other concern is like a tributary that has no outward flow to the ocean, stagnant, still, and stale. It lacks both life and freshness. Nothing would be more disastrous and out of harmony with our self-interest than for the developed nations to travel a dead-end road of inordinate selfishness. We are in the fortunate position of having our deepest sense of morality coalesce with our self-interest. I mean, that's King arguing that, like, we are fortunate that in this society, we would all benefit from a restructuring of society itself for that moral imperative of let us put the thou above the I. That is also in our own self-interest, that the self cannot be self or have the value of self without the other selves. Yeah, and I mean, King gets kind of philosophical about it, but he's basically talking about a civilizational basis, a philosophic basis that has everything to do with the concreteness of war, the war in Vietnam, the way the war explodes in the cities of America. And yeah, I think that's why I'm really stuck on this whole thing of King. I mean, King goes beyond just saying we have two choices, white civilization or an alternative civilization. King is saying, like, when will we see that this is the choice between chaos or community? For there to be, I mean, this is kind of what Jeremiah, I think you're bringing up before I left to go get coffee, which is you're basically saying, like, if there's going to be a civil war, even among the minorities of white folk who only know destruction, who only know values and strong gods of destruction, that inevitably it will cause devastation for the Black community, all communities, children, the innocent.
I think minorities are first in line.
Yes.
Speak up a little bit.
If you look at martial law and you look at ICE, the minorities are the first people to suffer in these institutions. I think it's interesting that, I don't know, that kind of perspective is completely absent from the present moment. And it's funny because Charlie Kirk is somebody who maligned MLK every chance he got, which is very funny. But basically the interest in hand in this matter, or the Trump administration, and then the opposite, the Democrats who are completely absentee, who don't have a platform, who are only interested in making money. If you look at how the way that they maneuver sort of politically, and you don't really have that. You don't have that collectivist impulse. You don't have the unionism is not as popular as it used to be. I'm a union member too. I used to be a union delegate. And I'm a member of a union that's currently in protracted negotiations, and there's very little interest in taking part in that process. And I feel like it's
And you're taking part in what?
in the process. My union is currently negotiating a contract. It's maybe like a year ago that it expired, and we've done maybe I've voted no to 3 different contracts at this point already. But there's still no interest amongst those people to come step out of their houses or away from their computers or their posts and participate. And it's all, in a way, I feel like it's all related. It's people are so immersed in their own lives and so complacent that they're not seeing themselves in this issue. They're seeing it as an abstract thing. And it's a very bad moment. It's a good moment for somebody like Trump, but it's a very bad moment for this country because you don't have that thrust from anywhere. And of course, the main problem is leadership. Is as far as someone who would galvanize people on a larger scale, but it's just not happening. The Cold Civil Wars between authoritarians and capitalists, and that's not much of a choice. It's not much of a choice that we have, and it's very sad. But that this aspect is missing. History is missing from this conversation, and that's a very American thing. We have no sense of history, but also very sad. So.
Well, what's interesting, this hearing on you talk, when I said something about identifying the various ideologies, basically what's happening, you have certain people that belong to a group. It's not a question of ideology, it's an immediate preoccupation. If I'm on the computer and I'm comparing and contrasting, as Trump says, the price of eggs, that's not ideology. So then the question comes, how does the free school, is free school open to people coming in with a preoccupation and no ideology, but open to at least develop some type of consciousness? Because I see the free school little by little. You may come in without a particular consciousness, but it tries to encourage a person take a position, a moral position, a political position. I don't mean get it done and go out, but just think more than just, as Trump says, the price of eggs. Of course, now he's talking about crypto, so it's different. Yeah, but that's why the dialectical process is important. That, like, I started with the free school. I was in North Carolina. I noticed all of you coming up, and I heard one dialogue. Every year, when the consciousness expands, I see how all of you are more inclusive. Before you make a decision, you're considering other things, and augmenting the reading list with Du Bois. If you only read the crises, you see one component. As time goes by, you read the first part or the second part of what people got first. Then later on, you start reading the first. Then your ideology or your worldview changes. And I see that's why I keep bringing up the issue of the free school. That what impresses me, I do notice people come in, they don't necessarily think in terms of consciousness and ideology, but later they start using that lingo. They'll say, "Oh, I didn't even realize I had a consciousness." Or,
the person that writes like the prison letters, right? And people, all friends I have that have been locked down, and girls I know and their dads, that kind of what we talking about, something get ready to go down. It would almost be like you wouldn't even really believe that it would come from inside there, because nobody not really thinking that they're not alive, or there's not like a pulse. It's the same thing if you go to the temple and the newspaper. I get one most of the time because the brother always like, so I get a chance to see the paper, if I'm not looking for it, I'll get that paper. But for me, it's like the pulse, so that I know that I still come to the free school, because my way of life is that I still want to see things done on the ground up too. But don't lose the pulse, because this is the kind of thing that raises up, like your blood pressure go up because you think something get ready to happen, and then it's not happening yet, but it's something like you trying to like make a prognosis maybe, but that's affecting how you feel about what you're doing. But don't overread it. But don't. I'm not undermining you. But don't undermine what the people living on their level. You ain't seen nobody get up and go downtown and tear, like grown people going downtown tearing up buildings and seeing somebody pull people out their cars. Nobody ain't going for all that kind of ruckus to get what we believe in. That's why we're in this church. We are believers that Almighty going to put his little finger to put all these differences in the land, this land that we live on in this country. How this land was really sacred for me, I understand that, but people's lives are sacred too. But not to have a nuclear contest or some pistol contest about what we talk about around this table.
I know. If I could just say, unless I'm.
No, go ahead.
You and I have been around for the longest period of free school. We've seen it evolve. We've seen people come and go. But I think what is very apparent, and I think Fatih saying, well, I was looking at it when I was in North Carolina on the live stream, is that ideologically we have evolved. And I know you can attest to this, we always took ideas very seriously. And it was not just ideas to a form of representation. Oh, I read Du Bois, or oh, I read Garvey, or something like that. It was the knowing or understanding ideas in order to apply them to social change. Of course, a group like us, like 20 people or more meet every Saturday and work through ideas. Well, we won't, as just ourselves, be the decisive force. But if the ideas that we have come to, the conclusions that we come to, can be a part of a generalized movement of thought and of consciousness, then we've made a contribution. Now, we don't know that will happen. We hope so. And then, of course, maybe there will have to be devastation on a scale that we've not seen in order for people to search out. And I agree with you about this, Andrew. People have a sense, I know, especially with the trade union movement, and I think that has a lot to do with trade union leaders who are not trusted by the members. But people don't trust what goes for leadership. They don't like the vision. And then, of course, in the labor movement, in the Black movement, where you try to take ideas out of it,
Or politics.
Yeah.
Like Baldwin doesn't matter to most Black elected officials. This 100th anniversary doesn't mean anything to you. And that, to me, is not don't say nothing about us, it says more about them, and that their leadership will not last for too long. I mean, I think what we believe is that ultimately people are looking for ideas. That's why we do all of these events and forums, and to keep active the ideological front, and then, of course, Philadelphia, which is a unique city for all kinds of reasons. Its cultural history, its artistic history, its history of movement and ideas. Well, it's a kind of a sense that there's something in the DNA, especially of Black Philadelphia, that predisposes it to ideas, to great ideas. That's not everybody, and of course, one of our greatest problems is with youth, young people under 40 or 45. Where are you? What do you think? Nobody knows, pretty much, But I think that's and it's a kind of an optimism that we have. Is it unjustified? I don't think so, but time will tell.
Oh, could I add something? This is to back up what you say. I almost forgot to mention when I talked about the subdivisions of the African American community, one of the ideological communities is the prison class. Me, because I pointed out my mother oversaw a pen pal. She said letters from prison, and I worked. So before some of the letters, you would think they went to some university. You talking about consciousness? They knew who the other was. Their description of the man is very clear cut. There's no ambiguity. But over the years, you see that same person who's angry starts to use words like, well, according to the honorable messenger, so you can tell they were influenced by the nation. And they were moving outside of their physical immediate problems. So ideologically growing, you get locked up at 17, 18, you lock up 5 years, and the letters show that you still are, you're autodidactic, you're growing. So by the time you get out, you belong to an ideological community. Okay, maybe it's not brought together, there's no leadership, but more so than the so-called college educated. That's why I put it in quotations. You don't get an ideological community with a college education. Many times you get somebody who gets a degree in engineering, do a good job, he knows how to buy houses and cars and things. But the one that got out of prison a lot of times, the first thing he sees on the street is the haves and have-nots where do I fit in all this? He's asking fundamental questions. So you definitely, it's amazing. I think the enigma in the African American community, you cannot say, well, if you got some PhDs, there you got an intellectual question, you got an ideology. No, you have to go down, and it's not even the bottom. It's the disenfranchised, conscious group, which probably outnumber the so-called, definitely PhDs, and maybe the masses. Matter of fact, I think when you're talking about progress in the African American community, you can't just go on a database and say, well, we got 200 master's degrees. we got this. That you might as well take that and throw it in the trash. And you need to go around and talk to people and find out how they feel. Like say if you had a forum like this for people like that. And this is men and women. So it's not the male. This is why I use the word ideological community. It's imaginary. It's not something, they're not concrete boundaries. It's not a particular neighborhood. You could live in a shack, you know? But I understand exactly what you mean.
Let whoever come in here.
Oh, yeah, well, I think I wanted to sort of go to this one thing that you've said a lot, Doc, and I'm thinking about a lot, like MAGA as a movement for white civil rights. And I think I'm trying to get some clarity on that because obviously it's very different from how I've seen it in the past. But yeah, I think there is an undeniable element of that in the MAGA consciousness where it does always come from that perspective of, oh, white people are being victimized in this country, right? So, and I've been thinking about this a lot, and maybe this will be more questions than like I have answers for. But even going to what Emily was raising, King, right? I feel like the reason why the Black freedom struggle, and we have said it so many times, it is the third American Revolution, is that I feel like it has made it difficult for whiteness to be consolidated in old ways. I think even despite the counter-revolution that followed the Third American Revolution, which involved this cognitive manipulation of even the Black community, the submergence of that great music and replaced with something like hip-hop and all of that. But I feel like I'm still really stuck on this, that the Third American Revolution had irreversible consequences for this country because it fundamentally changed something about how people relate to each other, how it's fundamentally changed something about human social relationships in this country. And I think I have always seen the MAGA movement as a response not to the Black freedom struggle, but to the counter-revolution that followed, which in order to deal with the consequences of the Third American Revolution had to create these identities, like you were talking about, the queer identity, but whiteness in a new, like codifying whiteness as an identity in new ways, utilizing the university, utilizing, everything that we've talked about or whatever. And a part of that was DEI, a part of that was in some ways taking the white poor and making him seem like a monster, like racism almost like encoded in their DNA, counter-revolution of 1776 and so on and so forth. So the counter-revolution that was against the Black freedom struggle had to still, make the achievements of the Black freedom struggle in a part of its narrative. And, I'm not being able to say it clearly because I haven't thought about it enough, but I have seen the MAGA movement to be primarily a reaction to that, the elite capture of the narrative.
Oh, I see.
And I feel like what we are seeing right now of, okay, even if the MAGA movement represents that, and it is anti-elite, more than it is anti the Black freedom struggle, it still gets things wrong because its primary concern is my whiteness was supposed to pay and it doesn't pay anymore. Make that make sense, right? And what we are saying is that this is not really the answer. What the answer should be is that whiteness has victimized you and basically for people to not want to bring back whiteness, but to say that this is the time for us to basically demolish it from its roots, so that this, what King was talking about, community, the beloved community, can actually become possible. I'll stop there. It just, I don't have all of the words to, yeah.
Well, I wanted to build on this because I also wanted to connect a few things that I think Doc and Emily and others had said. But in our deindustrialization meeting, we've started studying Black Reconstruction. This past week, we read The Black Worker. And a question that came up in our discussion is, okay, during the Cotton Kingdom, why was it necessary for 10 to 20% of the population to be a class of slaves? And mostly it's for economic reasons at that time. But a question we put on the table is, why is so much of the Black population, must so much of the Black population still be submerged? Why does it still belong in the logic of a white supremacist social system today? And I don't think it's necessarily economic, it's civilizational.
Yeah.
And I think it gets to what Perba is saying, because like I want to bring in something else, which is around a month or two ago, some of us had gone up to Germantown, and we had
Up to where?
To Germantown, and we had met a brother from the mosque named Brother John Muhammad, who has worked really closely with Black youth for the last 25, 30 years. And one of the things that he had said is, like, when talking about the crisis of Black youth, he gave this African proverb, and then I have it here: the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And it made me think about how, whether it's like this prospect of civil war or the limitations, truly the limitations of the MAGA movement, like everything still comes down to that formulation that Du Bois had laid out in Black Reconstruction, where despite each side of the Civil War, to not make the war about the question of the color line, yet it still was, because it's really the Black worker that defines the limits and the true meaning of democracy. And I've just been thinking about the Black youth a lot and trying to make sense of it, because they are still not seen by either the Democratic or the Republican Party. And yet, like, I think there's still a key to this crisis and how it'll be resolved. And
I think if there's like a silver bullet or some, magical way to sort of swing the balance of the conflict, I think those are the people that have to be kind of activated. It's the people who are not ideological, the people who don't have conventional university educations. It's the people who, I hate to say it, listen to hip hop.
well, I don't think it's that they have to be activated per se, but I think what I'm trying to say is that part of the counter-revolution after King's assassination that we're talking about is that especially successive generations of young Black people were increasingly pushed out of the fold of the general American social system, because King and that movement was evidence of what it looked like when the nation began to, when the Black social system or Black values began to become more of the major inheritance of the nation and not just the minor inheritance. And I agree with the formulation that you're making about the MAGA movement. And it would have been, I think the best consciousness that movement could have produced is those white people literally identifying themselves with Black people first, in the crisis of Black people first, and how it embodies the crisis of white people.
So I'm sorry. Philadelphia, I came from the youth movement as in the hood. I'm still in the 60s. I still grew up in the youth movement. But the youth movement really is Philadelphia neighborhoods that people surviving without the factories, trying to keep our families alive. Whether they're young, they got kids, or the young girls got kids. we still, is the youth group that I'm representing, that's still the neighborhoods in Philadelphia, from South Philly to the end of Northeast where I live at, and Germany, all the neighborhoods, like that. And that's my representation when I just walk across the city. And I don't mean really I walk every block, but I can, because it's a part of how I grew up, that I can still have that focus inside of what it is. When young boys get locked down, they might get connected to old heads. I always was connected to old heads, and for a lot of latitude, so we can not come under gunfire between ourselves, or come under gunfire from somebody just looking to waste us away. But when I'm sitting here with students from other parts of the world, I've been with world students that was in the youth movement. The only thing about, can we become more authentic for each other's struggle and not let our struggle catapult other people, and then they forget. I used to make slingshots. Right. Don't use us unless we helping each other in the real bosom of what I feel like inside. Because Doc sacrificed everything to be here. You don't want to sacrifice, but I was the youngest homeowner in West Oak Lane. But and the FHA people, when they decided they wanted to uproot the whole neighborhood, I might have been one of the first tickets that they might have grabbed hold of, even if I fought with a lawyer that I had to pay out my pocket. But I took it in the heart, like Almighty let me have a taste of what I feel like that. But I still was this young person talking to bankers. No matter what it was, I still wrote the letter. I still wasn't married. My mother and father was home. I took care of that business. And for me to sit here and like say, wow, I had $100,000 home. I was probably up in the neighborhood I lived in, 71st Avenue. My mother lived 6600. I was all about 6 blocks away. But the thing about it, I ain't cry about the thing. I took it as like, I'm gonna be a soldier for our people. I'm not gonna like give up no matter if people just say I'm gonna fall. And the fear, the Lord put fear in everybody. You can have fear you think about as your fear. That's the fear of the Lord, because the Lord really is the thing. That's really the power that guides us to go where we're going. You go to the temple, that's the Lord that brings brothers to the temple or to the church, wherever we are brought to, so that we can refashion ourselves. I'm gonna say one more thing. So the film inside for me, for the revolution or reconstruction in Islamic language, I want to say this is our jihad inside. It's not to go outside the jihad on somebody else. This is comprehensive to take care of your spirituality and give each other support. It's the pen. It's not the sword. It's the pen and the sword, so that we able to help ourselves. But we need true alliances. We really need true alliances to be in each other.
Can I just say real quick about what you said about the youth? Sorry. I was talking to someone who was talking about the Beatles culture and Elvis, and you could also make the same argument for jazz. But it was the first time where the youth, music is a sociological, it's a group activity. Before that time period, and in that time period, when that new music is introduced, the youth are listening to a different music than what the older generation is listening to for the first time. You could say in this generation, music is hyper individualized because now people don't even listen to music together. This question of the youth and their problem, I don't think it's just a matter, it's beyond a matter of where are they at this point. It's like what Doc said, existential. We're talking about two civilizations in America. One is going through an existential crisis, and that leads me to my second point about what I wanted to talk about Charlie Kirk, which is that Charlie Kirk and what Emily was reading from Du Bois' Man of Civilization. Charlie Kirk made it really clear that he was a proponent of Western civilization. He was a student of David Horowitz, who was the editor of Rampart. I hate this guy. I'm going to bring it up every time. He was the editor of Rampart magazine and an ally of Huey Newton, a colleague of Huey Newton. And he became a neocon later in life. And if you were familiar with David Horowitz's work, He was an extreme neocon, extreme supporter of Israel. He said Obama was a terrorist, and that sort of thing. He was part of a network that was engineering fear and division in America by all these racist things. Like there shouldn't be a mosque next to, the World Trade Center, even though there already was one there, a couple blocks away. And what I mean to bring up is we can't just place Charlie Kirk because he was an individual. He was a father with kids. No, he was, you don't just make $40 million, by yourself without at least lying to someone or conniving someone. He was part of a network of money, and it wasn't neutral, and it wasn't anti-Israel. And I don't agree that it was a conspiracy to kill Charlie Kirk. I don't think those kinds of conspiracies exist. I think it's an intellectually lazy way of going back and retconning what you believed to say, well, the MAGA movement is progressive. How could this happen? It draws me back to this youth culture and the existential crisis that they're in, that the MAGA movement and, the whiteness, eventually they're going to have to confront the fact that, they're shadow boxing and really the enemy is inside. What the MAGA movement claim, the civilizational claim that he's trying to make is, white civilization has all these enemies at the gates. That's the mentality, the victim mentality of Charlie Kirk and Stephen Miller and David Horowitz. And, I just want to say, because I've been talking to Blaze and Jeremiah, how do we stay ideologically consistent? And, with all honesty, I voted for Donald Trump in the past election. And the way I see it is still the same, whereas Donald Trump was a revolution against the elites, but maybe the elite side was stronger than the populist side. I was listening to Tucker talking about Fati, what you mentioned we called the non-professional managerial or the professional managerial class, and Tucker was saying like, oh well, you can rob black people, they won't do anything. You can get rid of this under appellation, not white people. But if you take away these people's living in like Brooklyn and Los Angeles, they will burn this place because they don't know how to live without luxury. And just lastly, where I see myself, Wanda said back in 2016 that I'd rather have a civil war than a world war. And, I think that America did say, we're not going to project our violence outside anymore. We're not going to export those. And in that instance, the Trump movement was a progressive force because it was anti-war. But this period in the second term of Trump, he's made a compromise with the neocon deep state. And, I don't think it has to do with any blackmail. I think that is just a decision that he made. Maybe he was scared after the assassination attempt in Pennsylvania, but that compromise was how he got the big, beautiful bill passed. And when he made that compromise, to me, he compromised the working class. So I feel like I've ideologically consistent. I don't see any future in the Trump movement as of right now, but I do see a future in what we call the co-civilizational aspect of growing up in America, whereas we're growing up adjacent to this opportunity to see Afro-American civilization, or my background in Islamic civilization, South Asian, but because of that, my personal background, I can't see Charlie Kirk as just just a father or anything. People were saying, because Charlie Kirk died and then it was 9/11. Oh, after 9/11, we all came together. I don't remember any we after 9/11. 9/11 was a very traumatizing, event for me because my identity went from being Indian to being, quote unquote Muslim. And my father was harassed by the FBI after 9/11 because he's a scientist from the country. But anyway, so that's how I see the world right now. And I'm glad it's a civil war, not a world war. I'm not opposed to anything that's happened. I don't have a grim outlook. I'm happy that it's all coming. The roosters are coming home.
But I feel like I understand that. I guess my point is more about, okay, like let's say it does get to the point of like what people call kinetic violence and conflict. I don't
Say kinetic violence.
like actual like not. I don't think it would be like standing armies or something like that, because that's even that stage of warfare no longer really exists. But like you could say paramilitaries, paramilitias, people waging, whether it's in cities or in like rural parts or something like that. I'm not sure I want that to happen either, if I'm being real about it. And I guess to a larger thing about like what Michelle was saying about Black youth, but about where free school is in general, I guess this whole conversation is, I think even if Black youth have been pushed out of society, the other thing that is very clear is that they are still preyed upon by very evil and malicious forces at the same time, and you can't discount that. And that, I think, was the clearest thing that I learned from Brother John Muhammad's talk about his book, which is that even while they've been completely iced out of like the mainstream of American society, it's like they're still the recipients or the targets of the most evil forms of manipulation by like these like shadowy forces that exist that no one is really able to identify clearly. And so I think like
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
I got grandsons, right?
Yeah.
I have grandsons, 4. And they're not lost in the population count. But there's a lot of people that's I'm a grandparent, and there's a lot of parents that still guide, and they still guide them. Even if you don't see them, they still could be guided, because we don't see them. And people care about their kids. I care about my grandkids, I care about something like that. So sometimes they do have those talks. They're not trying to be a totalitarian parent either. But sometimes they learn, they can walk, and a lot of them gonna learn street smart ways to survive, like what I might do. I ain't telling you got to copy what I do, but sometimes it's just a street smart way of life that I don't disrespect Tony, disrespect everybody in front of you, and then you break the respectful chain that kept you here. It's like a respectful chain of life that keep you here.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is...
But I keep my eye on Black youth in my neighborhood, because everybody that I know, I'm happy to still physically see them. I know their moms, and I know the playgrounds they go to. But we all don't have bulletproof vests on everything.
And I feel like what I'm trying to say is that whether it's you and the role that you play in your neighborhood, or the free school, or even the Nation of Islam, the strategy, the way that I conceptualize it or frame it is like, we are saying in the way that Baldwin said, he actually has this short story called Come Out the Wilderness. And that to me does feel like our political and moral and ideological strategy is we are telling people, but especially young people and especially Black youth, come out of the wilderness that you have been trapped in by this evil society. And that especially Black people, but the American people have been placed in the wilderness with no way out.
What about the other youth?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Right. So I'm saying
you got Hispanic youth.
Yes.
You got Vietnamese youth.
Right.
You got Cambodian youth. In my neighborhood.
Right.
They all, but they all they could be the same target.
Right. Yeah. No. That's so. Like I'm saying, like the general thing that I'm trying to describe is like, yeah, the way that Fatih said it. It's like we are calling to people to come out of this wilderness and to enter into community with each other. Like that to me is like the only, like especially in the immediate sense, that to me seems the only solution. And I know this is kind of a pivot, but I wanted to say it because it's been on my mind, I guess regarding going back to the Civil War thing, if that's okay. But I think, yeah, it made me think about John Brown, because you brought it up, Derek, and also the article that Blaze wrote for the last issue of Avant-Garde, which I recommend that people read. But the way that Du Bois talks about the imperative that Brown was answering was almost that, like, the way that Du Bois narrates it is that Brown believed that it's almost like there had to be a struggle, and most likely a bloody struggle, to end slavery immediately, or the consequences of not resolving that would be far worse. And so actually, like, can I read like 2 paragraphs from the John Brown book? So towards the beginning of the book, Du Bois says, and the sects were thinking, like these different groups of people who believe things. And he says, all men were thinking. A great unrest was on the land. And it was not merely moral leadership from above. It was the push of physical and mental pain from beneath. Not simply the cry of the abolitionist, but the upstretching of the slave. The vision of the damned was stirring the Western world, and stirring black men as well as white. Something was forcing the issue. Call it what you will, the spirit of God or the spell of Africa. It came like some great grinding groundswell, vast, indefinite, immeasurable, but mighty, like the dark, low whispering of some infinite disembodied voice, a riddle of the Sphinx. It tore men's souls and wrecked their faith. Women cried out as cried once that tall black Sibyl, Sojourner Truth, quote, Frederick, is God dead? No, thundered Douglas, towering above his Salem audience. No, and because God is not dead, slavery can only end in blood. And then at the end of the book, Du Bois is kind of talking about the legacy of Brown's life, and he says, for such reasons it is that the memory of John Brown stands today as a mighty warning to his country. He felt in his soul the wrong and danger of that most daring and insolent system of human repression known as American slavery. He knew that in 1700, it would have cost something to overthrow slavery and establish liberty, and that by reason of cowardice and blindness, the cost in 1800 was vastly larger, but still not unpayable. He felt that by 1900, no human hand could pluck the vampire from the body of the land without doing the nation to death. And so he said in 1859, now is the accepted time. Now is the time to strike for a free nation. It will cost something, even blood and suffering, but it will not cost as much as waiting. And he was right. Repression bred repression. Serfdom bred slavery until in 1861, the South was farther from freedom than in 1800. And I just wanted to bring it up because the formulation that Blaze makes in the article was that, in a way, Brown was right to force the issue of slavery, or to be part of forcing the issue of slavery, and that it had to end in blood, basically, which Du Bois, as Frederick Douglass also said. And I think the difference today is that we could say maybe one has to force this question of empire and of the cost of empire in order to prevent a far more calamitous reckoning, basically. And that I still believe that our hope is that the meaning of Martin Luther King and of the Third American Revolution is that one can force the issue without it resorting into actual violence, but that it can be resolved non-violently. But I don't know, I just wanted to bring that up as like, yeah.
Could I comment on
Let Lori come in first.
Okay.
I was thinking about what you were saying about the crisis of governance and legitimacy in like the state and rule and law, and with civil war, where I think you said that it's when a minority is basically pushed to the brink of resolving the issue by force. And I feel like, I don't know, I was just sitting with it because in some ways we've identified a lot of different minorities that are all sort of struggling against each other, where even if it's like the white, right, MAGA, like the left, like the radical left, whatever, the progressives, and like Black people who are technically a minority in this country, like even the Asians and Latinos and the immigrants, like, but in some ways this question of democracy is like, yeah, like in search of a majority or in search of what could be a general will. And I feel like it's only in finding that majority can civil war be averted. But I think even thinking about, yeah, concretely, like what the Civil War would have to, I guess, like manifest as, like you called it a cold Civil War, where I was trying to think about it too, and I feel like people are bringing up basically the framework of like secession, of like progressive states
Yeah.
seceding and like that.
Both
kind of-
sides talk about it.
Like both sides do talk about it, but this framing of I think the cold civil war as being a struggle within the state to take over the state.
Yeah.
And I think it came up last week too, when you were talking about elite capture, and in some ways it was a question mark of who does Trump represent, because has it sort of fallen away from the Democratic mandate or like the popular vote, like the fact that he won the popular vote, where now is he acting basically like purely more for himself than for like what the people maybe elected him for. And I don't know, I'm just thinking about it because it also relates to the framing of like Black people, 20% of white people, then the other remaining like 60% of white people are sort of not committed yet. And even like earlier in the discussion, we were talking about how the majority of young people are not affiliated or like emotionally invested in either party or either side at this point. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think like it is important to actually ask the question of the cost of empire, but I think King as a leader, and I think actually like the triple evils I keep coming back to, where it can't just be, I think, yeah, like cost of empire, loss of jobs, without the labor movement being fused to this question of neocolonialism or like the world, which is like the civilizational question. But I think it's, yeah, I just feel like King is really the only leader who has, I think, like the civilizational foundation to basically forge a new majority in the country. And at this point, that because it's a crisis of governance that ultimately boils down to a crisis of law, I think it's not like legal law at this point. I feel like really the question is like, what is the moral law or like of civilization that can create that? And yeah, I think I'm just thinking about what the cold civil war like actually looks like and whether it can proceed or continue and basically like reach more, I guess, like chaos, more violence, like basically independently of like where the people are. Because I feel like that's kind of where it is now, where like the Democratic Party has no base, like no support, no confidence, but is still like sort of fighting against whatever is happening with like the Trump administration.
Can I just say one thing, just a small thing? This was in the back of my mind, I didn't say it. But if I were to speculate on the future of the existing American state, I don't think the future is very bright for the state.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? And therefore, how do we think? And I agree with Jerry. We think differently now than we did 2 years ago. It's a lot of things that we have talked about that were never on the table. You know, I think that, you know, Frederick Douglass and Du Bois thought very differently because of a different time. Frederick Douglass is in the anti-slavery struggle, and Du Bois experiences the counter-revolution against Reconstruction. So he is thinking in ways that Douglass could not because of the circumstances. But Nuri, I just think, and I'd be interested in how you would think about this. If you ask the question, what is the future of the U.S. state? I mean, just looking at it now, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I feel like in some ways, I don't know.
Yeah,
but I
we
feel like in some ways, like what I'm interested in is like Reconstruction, like basically the Reconstruction period, not because we're going to go through a civil war like the American Civil War, but I think this question of like the federal, like basically the federal government itself was like so broken down and almost like had to be changed. And in some ways, like, I feel like the only direction that I see is like, if there was Reconstruction after the Civil War, it was defeated. There was the Civil Rights Movement, which you could say was a second Reconstruction, that there will need to be a third Reconstruction of the state. So,
Hold on, wait a minute. Then I think, after she finished, then Alice, then Fatih.
And I feel like in some ways the question of like the forging of a majority is the question of like who will the new American people be, which I feel like we have been talking about for like years now. I feel like that is basically the thread of continuity that I see that we've been concerned by and concerned about. And when I was reading like Where Do We Go From Here also, and like in the Black Power chapter, King is talking about like basically the conflict that is emerging with like the younger generation, their interest in Black power, their relative disinterest in like white people as being a part of the civil rights movement. And King is basically talking about how there might be basically a relationship of like principled unity, or how there could even be like one movement in the civil rights movement, how to keep it together. And he's saying that like the answer, like, it's not just going to be that, like, it's just all happy and good from, like, the first moment, but that the answer was only to be found in persistent trying, perpetual experimentation, persevering togetherness. And it's like, then he has a really philosophical quote, which is, like life, racial understanding is not something that we find, but something that we must create. What we find when we enter these mortal planes is existence, but existence is the raw material out of which all life must be created. A productive and happy life is not something that we find, it is something that we make. And so the ability of Negroes and whites to work together, to understand each other, will not be found ready-made. It must be created by the fact of contact. And so I guess the question is, how can that principled contact actually be facilitated? Yeah, and so I don't know. Those are just some
I guess I'm slightly trying to make sense of past conversations we've had and then also today's conversation, because I'm struggling to wrap my mind around, in this struggle for the state, what actually is going to be the impact on ordinary people? Like, is it actually as disastrous? I think that this conversation is sort of foreseeing as a potential among, I think it's the question that you're having, which is, but in previous discussions, we've also said that actually in the struggle of the state, ordinary people are still running society. And if anything, it's actually a greater potential or opportunity for the masses rather than actually. So I think that's one thing that I'm trying to wrap my mind around, because I feel like this conversation was kind of saying like, oh, okay, in this struggle of the state, ordinary people will be crushed or destroyed in the process as well. But I don't think that's true. And that's one thing. And then the other is
Can I just say one thing? Just, I mean, see, I don't think this struggle for who will capture, who will hold on to state power is a matter of revolutionary seizure, people seizure of power. And that's why I was saying that this will constitute battles of small groups in society, usually small groups of white people attacking official governmental or state institutions, or even the assassination of principal figures on this or the other side. Because just a small thing, because MAGA people have literally openly talked about revenge. And they mean an eye for an eye. So that leads me to this conclusion that it will take on this small, groups of armed men carrying out assassinations, capturing this high ground or this institution. I sometimes think about it as even, foregoing an all-out armed assault upon the Capitol and taking over state capitals. So things like that in the midst of, what could turn into social chaos. And then you get, let's take just a scenario, take a city like Philadelphia, the mayor or the city council. Everyone should continue to come to work and you will be paid and that type of thing. So they will hold, like you're saying, the government, let's say in the city of Philadelphia, will by hook or crook hold itself together. Whereas, let us say, in the northern part of Michigan, we have these armed groups, or even in parts of central or western Pennsylvania, where armed groups could easily take over cities. Well, we just heard, I think it was in Pennsylvania this past week, 3 cops were killed. Now, is that random, or is that a political act that would be anticipatory of a deeper and wider civil war? That's the way I'm thinking about it. That's why I say to Poor, but I don't see it affecting Philadelphia. But the other thing, I just want to add this, I think, and this is a big question, but I think I would come down on the side of the positive. The Black social system would save Philadelphia. And that means the churches, the civic organizations, the community organizations, and so Black people will once again save Philadelphia. But that does not in any way rule out, I think, what you're getting at too.
Yeah,
But go ahead.
yeah, no, that was my question, which is that, is this just a battle of small groups and forces, or is it an all-out civil war, as was in 1865?
See, and I see it as that, but with the support of larger political forces. In other words, a group might identify itself as MAGA. They might have a MAGA flag. We are getting revenge for what happened to Charlie Kirk. And then you get a whole group of Republican senators in the US Senate upholding them, supporting them, and saying that, having all kinds of arguments. And so you see all of this layering and intersection. But then I would say this, and I think the evidence thus far shows it: Black people have no desire to get involved. They feel this is a reckoning between white people. I think there's no question. I think the Ta-Nehisi Coates essay in Vanity Fair, which says Charlie Kirk, I mean, who is he? He's a racist, he's a white supremacist. And why should we get involved in a struggle between Ezra Klein and somebody from MAGA over Charlie Kirk and doing politics right? But I think, and I agree with the way Fatih is trying to look at these segmented groups. I think it's very sociological. And I hope, we would do it in Philadelphia, the Black Gods, the whole thing. But I think we have to get more empirical, more specific, and more concrete in looking at these groups. Because outside of Black folk, which we have our own differences, our own different worldviews, but we generally congeal around a consensus view that the external forces in society of white supremacy are against us, that we have to always be on guard against them. But if you take the white population, and I think there's sociological study after sociological study, which says that white people do not sustain community. Let alone political organization. They just don't sustain it anymore. And there, the book, What Happened in Kansas, I think that's the title of it. It's about 30 years old, where sociologists looked at white community. And the title of the book is, the title of the book is called Bowling Alone.
Oh, yeah.
Which is an apt metaphor, where white people don't have bowling teams, they bowl alone. And, but Black folk tend to, go towards group activity and group consciousness. Not enough, perhaps not as much as existed at another period, but we do. So Yeah, you see where I'm coming
Yeah.
from, yeah. I don't,
No, I
go
think-
ahead, I'm
Well,
sorry.
that's why I think your formulation, or this reminder that you had in the beginning of a compromise, where in the history of white American history has been a series of compromises, starting with the revolution, then of civil war. Then I think even now the question is actually, because of the civil rights movement and because of King, is there a greater portion of white America that is no longer willing to make a compromise, but is actually willing to be swayed in a moral direction?
Well, I argue yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, you go ahead.
No,
Listen,
go ahead.
that's my idea, that 20%, that strategic part of white people. And I think and that's why the acts of individual terror defeat the whole thing. That 20% must identify itself, must identify its allies, must identify its community, but then more than anything else, must identify the strategic center as the Black community, the Black proletariatism. That's what the debate is about.
Well, I think that's why I think in the part with Kirk, or what was, I think people have already talked about Kirk more broadly and what he represents, but actually something that also I found very representative of a portion, very white supremacist, is that in this discourse of the future of America, either he believes that this question of Black America is not important, or that Black culture just be enslaved because of the crime, the violence, this narrative that Black people are that they were better off in slavery. And I think that's also the narrative that Du Bois was fighting, which is that of the Negro problem, that America, it's not a Negro problem in America. But what's so interesting, I feel that is completely ignored, is that the Negro or Black America is not the problem, but actually maybe a solution in this crisis. The way that during the Civil War, the agency of Black folk, or even the existence, was not on the table. In this discourse of what the future of America could look like, succession, keeping slavery within its boundaries, expanding slavery beyond its boundaries, there was never a question of like, what are Black folk thinking? And what would they do if they were freed? And I think that's it. This conversation is also making me think of, I guess, an earlier term that you had used, which is the Black Swan, which is the ignored being actually what determines the future. And that's why I think even in this conversation, where part of it is like, yes, what is going to be the impact of this ruling or the struggle for state power, how that affects society. But then I'm also more interested in this Black Swan, which is like, what is it that would emerge? I feel like, that's what I'm trying to say, which is that to understand, yes, there might be impacts on broader society,
Can I just say one thing, Fati, to her? I just want to, because I think it's very important what you're saying. It relates to Jerry and to Nuri. This idea that all of this will take an unusual turn. We're on one trajectory right now, but then everything could possibly take an unusual turn. And that you get it in Baldwin, those white people who have reached a level of consciousness. And frankly, like he says, this whole thing is held together by a few people who love type of idea. But I think this 20% could make all the difference in the world. Yes, if they align in a principled way with Black folk, they could be the difference. Together, we could be the difference, and that means qualitatively. So that 60%, let us say, I kind of write that 20% far right view off for the time being, the short run, although everybody's capable of change. But I think for us, it is important that 20%. This is why this far left white people are, or the social democrats like in Emily's Union, are so, such an obstacle. You know, I think it is right. I mean, there are white progressives or white revolutionaries who wish to reinscribe the color line for their own political purposes. But, yeah, that's, but go ahead, Fatih, I'm sorry, man.
Oh, no, I'm not gonna talk long.
Okay.
I'm just a very practical person in the sense of I always try to find a practical application. And this actually follow up, Derek. That's your name?
Yeah.
Your name?
Yeah, Derek.
Yeah, the idea of the classrooms. Okay, I think the question is, see, elementary we become middle school is in the high school you go out the street, go to jail, go to college, right? Question is, where do you plant the seeds of ideology with young people? And I say seeds, meaning the initial orientation. Now, what I see, because I'm in middle school, first of all, in addition to cloning and what do you call it, accelerated assimilation of ESL students, meaning the brainwashing, wiping the memory out, immersion English classes, you can't speak the native language, don't get any support in native language. Mixing them all together. See, when you mix Asians, Latinos, like up there they got Egyptians, Afghani, African Americans in the same classroom, okay, you have to teach one way. Now the question is, do you form after-school programs where it deals with these separate issues? And I would say probably the free school can maybe brainstorm as to give suggestions to communities. How do you deal with the issues in your own community? And I say practical because, see, we could talk about, say if we talk about recruitment, well, where do we go? And then too, what happened to them? Look, those reading lists, that's another thing. Why don't they put Du Bois's first autobiography on the 7th, 8th grade reading list? You should see the reading lists. They are literally a joke. The things that 4 books a school year, each quarter, they're indoctrinating people with, you know, they talk about empathy. Now, who talks about empathy during the time of Trump? Okay, you're sitting in the classroom talking about, oh yeah, what's the most important thing with this character? Oh, he has empathy. Well, what about the reality of Trump? In other words, you have to connect education with the children see and experience. So you have the fantasy world in the room, or the idea of the immigrant that came from a wealthy background and then she's a peasant in America. But because of the good graces of mainstream America, she's allowed to come from her misery into prosperity. So the teaching of immigrants is to show that you are nothing when you come here. And it's only because of me, the great white hope, that you have any hope. So you got a whole lot of narrative going on, and particularly in middle school. And then 2 blocks. 2 block to block. Can you imagine my students see me walk by, are you gonna pull me out of here? Because I do pull-ups. You pull me out today? They can't stand being in that room. None. They are held hostage. I think, what are we gonna do in the new school to save the children?
Right.
Do we form after-school programs? Do we try to forget talking to school boards because they're worried about getting schools closed down because just students are failing standardized tests. So we have to deal with that reality.
Like, why was the schools called gymnasiums? Why was the class in the other thing, the gymnasium was
Swimming pool.
Well, I'm using the gymnasium was the classroom. I'm saying that word, the gymnasium.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? But look at all the things that you had to do. Well, you know, all these physical things, the rope, the horses, but it was still connected to the classroom. You know.
Oh yes, but you're very right. And I think this in part answers Fatih's question. It is not to change the classroom as much as it is to change society. Because even in the ancient period of, you could say, ancient Greece, ancient anything, society educated people. The gymnasium, the gymnasium, in the Platonic sense was, first of all, it was a center of debate and discussion, you know, but always to improve society in order to improve the human being or to improve the child, which is the most sensitive, the most heart-wrenching when you look at a society like this.
Well, I'm witnessing it. See, I see the ship sinking. Okay, we're seeing
yes,
we have a great idea.
Yes.
But every minute that I say that I know, okay, I counteract. I'm clandestine. I kidnap children, take them into a closet and educate them. And they say, what'd you do today? This is what I did. I just write something I know you want to hear. You know, they say, well, we need your lesson plan. We want to know what you're teaching. Okay, let's see. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. What can I say for this dummy that wants my lesson plan? But when I teach someone, I don't want to contribute to the conspiracy.
No.
So they usually have to arrest me.
But see, that's why, you know, the best public school teachers are the public school teachers who live in the community, like Catherine Blunt, or like my friend Brenda Itana that I talk about a lot. They felt imperative that not only that they teach, but that they be anti-apartheid activists, that they be pro-Palestinian activists, to improve and enrich society. And in some ways, that's what we're doing. You know, Fatih, you will not believe the obstacles, you know, subtle passive aggression, discouraging people. And then, you know, just like Andrew was saying, there is a general kind of distrust of everything and everybody, man. But our idea, and part of our idea, I guess you would say, is to attempt to begin to shift the ideological and moral center, at least in Philadelphia, of society. And for Baldwin, we tried to reach out to high schools. I know Alice was involved with South Philly High School, and it was a beautiful experience, but the limitations of trying to do something in a school, because you're up against a ignorant, hostile administration, starting with the principal. The principal don't care nothing about the school or the children. That's right. That's why I'm gonna keep my job. Or we were at West Philly.
Well, we almost have to think of ourselves as infiltrators, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, but you address the issue of what they tell you to say, but you make sure that you have the real narrative, that there's a way of trying.
But even you take a person like yourself, you need the support of those outside of the classroom to support what you're doing.
Oh, definitely.
No person,
like,
this is.
I see this as the talented temp, the boys talent. Okay, you go out, could be informal dinners with public school teachers or something. It means it's not like you have to get a torch and go out and dress.
Let me give you an example. And this shows you the debasement of higher education. I guess debasement is a good word because it has gone into the basement, the gutter. I was fired from Temple, and the explanation was, well, we don't need Du Bois now. And this is an institution of higher education and a Department of African American Studies, and you don't need, well, who do you need? Well, we need Kendrick Lamar. And I'm saying, well, now, just based upon classic education that you and Derek are talking about, classic education establishes a canon, a true and tested canon of knowledge. That might not be the right way to go about it. But since the university claims that classical lineage, the university, And that's why ordinary people look up to it, because they feel that there's something of high value, disinterested, that a professor is not concerned with him or herself as much as they're concerned with knowledge. Well, it's not the same as that. And so higher education does not produce young people. Well, there are a lot of young people it does produce or who are produced, such as the student encampments. We still have to, that has to be referenced, showing what young college students are capable of. But as an institution, higher education does as much damage to students who graduate from elite universities as the public school does to students who either don't or hardly graduate from public schools. Wow. And I agree, if I could just say one, I agree with you about your mother's correspondence. And I hope you make some of that available to us at some point.
Oh, yes.
That is...
The witness, the development, like somebody who can't spell every letter, because the correcting the person by responding to the person, write the correct spelling, and then they in turn show you that they learned what you taught them. So the correspondence is going back and forth, and then the letter writing improves through correspondence. That was the prison thing that she set up. And then what she did, she tried to get her friends, some of the sisters, to write. And they said, "Oh, I don't want to be locked up, brother." She said, you have to rise above the narrative established by the system of the so-called locked up brother. She found out a lot of them, they were Mickey Mouse charges. Somebody in the corner with a joint in the pocket, not somebody who shot the sheriff. But I just want to end by saying, I'm in the city in Tony's class at Temple. I couldn't even, his class was in the classroom and in his office. I go to the office, there was no sitting room. It was a free school in his office. I would sit, students would be coming in, "Hey, Doc," everybody would be talking about all these great ideas. I go by the offices of his friends, empty. I think the minimum was 5 students in the class they had. You're lucky to have 5. I go in Tony's classroom, he had a real round table. I had to go sit in the back. And everybody was happy. Everybody was smiling. Tony told my phenomenology, epistemology. In the other classrooms, everything was, here's the narrative, copy, paste. They didn't call it that. And sad. In other classrooms, everybody was sad. They would just sit. And Tony would be, yeah. And when somebody said something, Tony would say, "Well, I suggest you consider this in your analysis." He always spoke to undergraduates like they were graduates. Right. He had a way of talking to people that you come in thinking that you're nothing, and then you leave out thinking that you're something.
Yeah.
And then they walked out with pride. They started to change the dress style, walking with the strut. Right. The other classes, your head down, you got a suit and tie on, and you hate yourself.
So the devastation of being in school, like I have done like total reviews from kindergarten, completely through school, and probably my mom spoke German, so my dad, I'm basically learning when I come home with my mom and dad, whatever the obstacle is, whatever the struggle is, anything intuitively. And if I did speak in the class and if the teacher rejected me, my mother came to that school with her own profile of speaking German and going straight to the root word of it, because she knew she was teaching me at home too, and my dad too. She went to Girls Out, my dad went to Central. But they wasn't like camouflaged human beings either. They was who they were already. So I was very early, like at 3 years old, 4 years old, 5. Because you need that village of feeling inside. And I had that from all my relatives, whole family. Because they know that something, you have a destination, like you would be telling me, and you're gonna go ahead as long as you put that effort and you fight. You don't stop fighting. And so when you come up with the things about the school that you're in, and their intention is not even heard. Their intention is that we just gonna self-destruct these people, because their intention is not a pure intention. Now give me the pure intention that you need to start, your educational process with. Because if you deform it, and then in later years of life, you have a deeper challenge, because now you mirroring the thing that you're talking about, but then you got to begin to see your own person as your own inner person emerges after you done spent years thinking that you was getting there, and then you see these people then change you out of who you originally are, and that's like desecration for me to have witnessed that with other young people. I witness, and then I'm not saying I'm that you make you wake up, but it does take a lot of classical fundamental ABCs to get you to learn this re-lettering yourself, remodifying the letter to you, so you can write letters cursively, so you can really change who you are, but you still need to have dexterity. Yeah. You still got to have so many fundamental things, but if you're trying to use the wit that these people then put into you against somebody that might be self-taught or still learning, then you will defeat your own purpose if you think that this privilege, this hiding behind to live in this shell, that they're trying to make you a shell of a person and not who you really are. Yeah.
Well, that's what Tony did at Temple. He always, a lot of his students would consider graduate school because of him, then undergraduate, because a lot of his courses overlap.
Because you get a lot of punishment, you get a lot of punishments once you start walking what he had to do, because I know somebody said you could have had thousands, millions. That's probably what's in front of me. But I didn't go run and go jump on the first boatload of those people, because I know that they're going to leave our community. They're going to leave everything behind and go someplace else. But they're never going to be truly satisfied, because they done left the whole community for when they find out the end, it was like for nothing.
Well, the anti-Du Boisian coup d'etat, or whatever you call it. Mm-hmm. That was because he had developed a school of thought, an epistemology. The free school started there, and they saw the fact that people were growing. Mm-hmm. They were in decline. So a lot of the opposition was the black bourgeoisie with the backing of the dean of the liberal arts. Okay, she was Jewish. So you can't, of course, she had defined. So Molesty, there was an African there. So the idea is, their idea was, let's just talk about Timbuktu. Mm-hmm. Tony dealt with the reality of the black experience in America and connected it. Yeah, it came from Africa, but look what happened. And the emphasis on the black Reconstruction. Because everybody thought blacks were Democrats all the time. It's only he taught them what the Republican philosophy was, Reconstruction. Half of them didn't know history like he did. So forget the ideology. But I remember, because I was teaching for the Spanish department then, I would go up to, every time I got a chance. You were in Anderson, weren't you?
No,
Glad
I wasn't.
I know I could just get on the elevator and run through.
I was right across.
And it was full. Everybody was happy. Everybody was learning. When he left, it was just like you went to a funeral. I went on that floor. All the doors were closed, and I thought everybody was going to come out dressed in black. It was like somebody died. Because how long did that protest movement last? 2 weeks?
Yeah, the protest.
Well, when everybody came out for you, it was proud. It was thousands of people.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to say that, it was the injustice was unspeakable. And it was not just towards me, but when people take your job, they take your health care, they take, what you have to give to your children, your grandchildren, they don't give a damn. And they still have to answer for that. In fact, I'm not finished with that. The injustice was of that magnitude. And I do deal with, for instance, the Michael Cords of the world, who claims to be such a freedom fighter. And he has this display of this tribute to the first slaves that worked in the first White House of George Washington, down on Independence Mall, and Trump and them want to close that down, and so they're protesting. But my thing to people like Michael Cord, I say, yes, I can be with you, but you need to be morally principled and morally consistent. You can't pick and choose. You can accept one injustice, but you're going to fight against another one. So I said, my view was, are there enough students and faculty who care about these matters, who are prepared to stand up? And if you are, I will stand up and I will fight. And, like they say, what goes around comes around. So here you go, this is 2014, 2015. I didn't get my job back, but Temple didn't get that football stadium either. So I was prepared to make that trade-off, although I had to go on my food stamps and shit. But it was worth it. But come up to 2024, 2025, the crisis of the university is deeper now. Temple is not an elite university by any stretch of the imagination. So it's not an incentive. If you're going after the elites, you don't have to go up against Temple. You ain't got hardly no elites there. You go to where the elites are, Harvard, Columbia, and so on. But nonetheless, the question of the unprincipledness of administrators and senior faculty, where they are gatekeepers, and they not only mess over students, but they mess over graduate students. What graduate students have to go through it doesn't make any sense. I'm gonna drag this thing out. You're gonna stay here till I decide to let you out and all of that.
Yeah,
but then, but this, but then, because all of them, they went to elite Ivy League colleges. And I guess part of what animates them, and it's such an education for me to be around them, is that they were lied to. They would, and they could tell you better than me. They were being educated to serve a white supremacist elite, to become white, to think like white people. And it's real. And so I've got to shut my mouth here. I know from the Department of African American Studies, the teaching of Du Bois, which is paramount. You can, I taught Toni Morris and I talked to John about this Beloved and other works of hers, Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Mask, all of this, in a way of giving a rounded view of Black thinking, Black consciousness. But when it gets to the point that no matter what you do, it doesn't mean anything, that we will replace you because you're nothing, and these are Black people, you're nothing but another N-word. And then Molefe Asante went on to post on Facebook back then that I was not a scholar, I was nothing but a communist apparatchik. Given given the history of Paul Robeson, of Du Bois, of all of these Black thinkers who were punished because they fought for peace and against war, for him to use that language, that's what I'm saying with cats like Michael Cord and then these so-called freedom fighters, I said, if the first thing is to be morally consistent. If you can't be morally consistent, don't try to stand up here talking about you fighting Trump. I could do better without you, because I don't know when you're going to switch sides and be with Trump. But that was a thing. It was a fight for Temple. And ultimately, Temple has ended up in a financial and enrollment crisis.
Well, your course, since I was, like I say, working there, you're talking about 4 years, people ask me, when is that course being offered? Because I used to talk about how you incorporate the Du Boisian component in the teaching of philosophy. He said, well, where'd I go? Who is it? I would say, so you were very popular.
But it's a sad story, and not just my own sadness, because as you can see, I recur, this Saturday free school, but it's a tragic story for young people, a terrible example to young scholars, that this is the way senior scholars behave. They're nothing but, whatever you want to.
Well, they looked like what they were.
No question.
It was
they
very,
looked the part.
You know what it was? It was clear that you were viewed as being more than all of them put together.
Yeah.
They were looked at as being incompetent, ignorant, unqualified.
That's right.
That was the general attitude.
And that's what, and it wasn't.
They wanted to know who else was going to teach the boys in course. They didn't have anyone.
But Fati, we got to end, I think.
I know.
I know Emily, she had a long weekend on her job, and that she's still not gotten her sleep back. She did. But Nora, you want to do any?
Yeah, I can do short comments. Todd Bombala, Shantanu, many people said good morning. Someone named Esso Keita says, as shown in the book, that's Shamarka. What?
Who was that?
Shamarka. Shamarka says, as shown in the book, what's the matter with Kansas? Wages of whiteness versus solidarity with others who suffer class oppression. Shantanu said, Du Bois in Black Reconstruction said that Lincoln and others hoped that the end of the slave trade would passively end slavery itself. But because of the breeding of slaves, that expanded slavery from within, and that necessitated the establishment of a white supremacist social system. And then, let's see. Whiteness has become unsustainable. We have to embody a spirit of selflessness. Jahan says, it was interesting that Netanyahu said Charlie Kirk was a defender of our common Judeo-Christian civilization when Netanyahu was denying an Israeli hand in Charlie Kirk's killing. Jahan says, it showed to me a recognition of the fracturing of white civilization, the division of the Judeo-Christian unity between white Jews and white Christians. They fear that their civilization is at risk. And then BK said, there's been a track record of orchestrating unrest in major cities. The ultimate goal of that is division.
Yes. I guess we're done.
Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next week. Thanks to all the commenters.
I'd like to say welcome to our friend, my dear brother. Could you tell us your name? Say that again.
Yeah, that's he had emailed us with the founders for the Lucian Black reading.
Wait, do you say Troy? Jordan. Hey, Jordan.
It's a pleasure to meet you, and pleasure to have you, Andrew, all the way down from New York. Wow. So, Jordan, you coming to Lucian Blackwell on Tuesday?
Yes, I've been missing the streets a couple of weeks, so I said I'd come today. I'm still learning the city, so I'm going to do